Hello, everybody, and today is September 5th, 2021. 4 years to the date, almost that it was a night actually, 25, 8:30, that we heard the news about Gauri's brutal assassination. And as we all know, it was bloody, it was brutal, it was premeditated, and it was conspiratorial. It was part of the build up to this kind of hate politics that we are seeing burgeoning all over our country. And it was the fourth and the last of the kind of killings that we've seen. Narendra Dabholkar 2013, Govind Pansari 2015, M.M. Kalburgi 2015, and then Gauri Lankesh September 5th, 2021. The kind of outpouring and anger and resistance that emerged after Gauri's killing sort of epitomized the resistance I think that exists in this country, and we at Gauri Memorial Trust and CJP pay tribute to that resistance from a myriad different sources, different fields, different movements. There was a complete outpouring of anger and resistance. We keep thinking that if Gauri was with us today and we had faced with this pandemic and lockdown, she would have defied it. She would not have been constrained by it. She would have probably just broken all the rules and been there among the people, because that was Gauri. September 12th, we had this mammoth demonstration walking the streets of Bangalore and culminating at the parade ground. And I just want to just thank everybody at the Gauri Memorial Trust, CJP, and all of you young uh, leaders today who are with us to share both the grief and the hope of today. I'd like to begin particularly today, before we have our small video shown to you, with a poem written by Kalita. Gauri Lankesh has been a comrade in arms to all of us. She's now also part of the Gauri Memorial Trust. But dear sister of Gauri, and she has literally carrying the flag, so to speak, for her sister. She keeps telling me that, I fought my battle in different ways from you and Gauri, but you have dragged me into this. But she has really done it so gracefully, with smile and with tears. And the outpouring of her grief has also brought forth poems and poetry. And this is one of them, which we published as a small booklet in tribute, Akka, Poems for Gauri by Gauri Lankesh. This short poem is called Akka. You might be a photo on the wall. You might be a placard held up by hundreds of people. You might be flex on the background of a function. You might be a stage dedicated to the voice that speaks truth to power. You are everywhere. You are Dabholkar, you are Pansari, you are Kalburgi. Most of all, you are another Asifa. You are me and you are you. You are Gauri, I am Gauri. We are all Gauri. We are all Danamma, we are all Asifa. Torn, raped, sometimes on the surface, sometimes deep inside. Does it matter? Still raped. Hurt, but we fight. Torn, but we survive. Somehow, somewhere, in a small village, in the city or overseas, you are here, you are there, you are everywhere. Yet nowhere. I miss you, my Akka, my Gauri, my love. Since 2017, whether it is September 5th, the day Gauri was brutally killed, or January 29th, the day she was born, we organize resistances. They are not events. They have meaning. They hope to bring together voices, build alliances, and a political understanding. That's our attempt to deepen Indian democracy and constitutional values. The lockdown has also set us back by forcing us to do these online meetings, but we have very creative plans ahead for media workshops, activist workshops in the rural areas, so that the kind of journalism that Gauri Lankesh stood for, when she shifted to her mother tongue, Kannada, and was widely read across the districts and villages of the state, gets space and acknowledgement more than it does today. The Gauri Memorial Trust had the 104-year-old Doraiswamy, whom we lost recently, as its founding president. We have Mr. Ganesh Devi. We have many other members, including myself, Kavita Lankesh, Chukhi Nanjun Swami, who's the convener of the Rajya Raita Sangha, a premier farmers organization in Karnataka. K. Neela, who's a social activist and writer from Kalburgi. Dinesh Amin Mattu, who's a senior journalist and writer. K. L. Ashok, who's the convener of the Karnataka Communal Harmony Forum and a social activist. Rehamat Tarikire, professor of Kannada in the Kannada University and a noted cultural writer. A.S. Prabhakar, also a professor of Kannada at the Kannada University, who's a specialist in Adivasi culture and communities. Abu Salim Puttige, who's the editor of Varta Bharti, a very popular daily in coastal Karnataka. B. Narasimha Murthy, social activist and convener, Swaraj Abhiyan Karnataka chapter. Munni Swami, who's a senior Dalit activist and president, Federation of Dalit Organizations in Karnataka. Noor Sridhar, who's a social and political activist and convener of Karnataka Janashakti. Professor V.S. Sridhara, who's a professor of English. And of course, a very close friend and patron, Mr. Siddharth Vardarajan, who's the founder and co-editor of The Wire. So we come to you today, friends, again in one attempt at a united resistance. We have with us messages from Jignesh Mevani, very close to Gauri, one of her precious sons, and also a lovely message from Bano Jyotsna, who is the close partner of Umar Khalid. Here is Jignesh's message. Had Gauri been with us physically, she would have been planning an event seeking release of her son Umar Khalid while being happy seeing the release of Devangana and Natasha. She would have been more happy seeing Devangana and Natasha rather than Jignesh and Kanhaiya. She would have imposed her motherly dadagiri on both the fiery young women. As I'm writing this, I feel she's saying from up there, "You are such a darling, my son." She was full of energy and affection, love and care. I miss her Facebook posts where she used to irritate Sanghis, particularly when we were going to Karnataka for some public event. I missed her idli with her. I used to tell her, "Please find me some nice Bangalore partner." She used to say, "Yes, provided you promise to stay at my place." I miss her every time I watch that song on Gauri. In your eyes, in your eyes. I feel the urge to take revenge. Yes, revenge. But our way of taking revenge would be to uphold the Indian Constitution. Our revenge would be to keep the fire burning, to work tirelessly for the ones who are producing everything tirelessly, the working class. Dearest Gauri, you will live through us. My teacher on Teacher's Day, I promise you, Gauri, all my life I will fight for the poor. Miss you a lot. You are in our hearts. Jignesh. Someone like Gauri can never die. Well, that might sound like a cliche, but when it comes to a vivacious person, brimming with energy and exuberance, overwhelming everyone around with passion and emotions, the cliche holds some ground. The bullets pumped into her frail body with a lucky gun by masked cowards only stopped some vital functions. Her soul and her courage remain unscathed. In every march and meeting since her body was put to eternal rest, Gauri has been present amongst us. She walked with us when Kashmir was caged by abrogating Article 370. She was with us raising our voice in protest against the atrocious judgment on Babri Masjid. She was with us when the country witnessed the biggest civil disobedience movement since independence against CAA. She was in Bilal Bagh, Mumbai Bagh, Shaheen Bagh. She was everywhere, singing, smiling, sloganeering. We all saw her, felt her presence, the warmth of her beautiful soul, her indomitable courage to face all odds. That is her victory. They wanted to silence her forever. She bloomed into 1,000 new selves in new dreams. Someone like Gauri will never die. Bano Jyotsna. Thank you, both of you, for making today even more special. It now gives me a lot of pleasure and some pain to introduce three very, very special guests today, if guests we can call them because they are more comrades in arms. These are Asif, Iqbal, Tanha, Devangana, Kalita, and Natasha Narwal. On June 15, 2021, a flood of celebration burst out all over the country as the Delhi High Court delivered the judgment, freeing our three iconic young leaders from their 13-month plus incarceration. In a historic judgment delivered by Justices Siddharth Mridul and Anup Bambani, finally, even in a UAPA case, bail was given, and this gave us a lot of hope. But it also meant that 13 months they were in jail, and even now, 18 more of their fellow comrades and our young comrades remain in jail. Gulfishan, Ishrat Jahan, Athar, Miran Haider, Khalid Saifi, Shifaur Rahman, Sharjil Usmani, Sharjil Imam, and of course, Salim Malik and Salim Munna, among others, are still to be freed out of this completely manipulated and draconian case. The two notorious FIRs related to the February 2020 Delhi violence, a complete afterthought by a fascist regime. I don't want to keep us and our wonderful comrades away from these guests. So I'll just begin by saying that Asif, Iqbal, Tanha, आप झारखंड से लेके जामिया तक जो आपकी पूरी जर्नी थी, इसके बारे में बताइए, आपके संघर्ष के बारे में बताइए, अंग्रेजी हिंदुस्तानी जो भी जबान में आप बताएंगे। आप हमारे साथ आज रहे हैं, उसके लिए बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। गौरी अगर आज रहती तो आपको लेकर बेहद खुश रहती, और इसीलिए वी वेलकम आसिफ इकबाल तन्हा of the SIO organization was released. The lead judgment was in Asif's case, 233 pages. There was also a separate judgment in Devangana and Natasha cases. We invite Asif to please share with us his thoughts, dreams, concerns. Asif, by the way, is a scholar in Persian and is working today on hate crimes and hate speech after his release from prison. Asif.
शुक्रिया तिस्ता मैम। आदाब नाजरीन, तमाम सुनने वालों को मैं दिल की गहराइयों से शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ। ऑर्गेनाइजर का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ कि उन्होंने मुझे वक्त दिया, मुझे बुलाया। मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि मैं सबसे छोटा हूँ आप सब में से, और एक्सपीरियंस भी कम है, लेकिन पिछले चंद सालों से जो हालात देश का है उसमें ऐसा लगता है कि उम्र जो है वो कुछ मायने नहीं रखता है, और हमें कुछ करना चाहिए, हमें कुछ बोलना चाहिए, खासकर अधिकार के इशू को लेके, अपनी आइडेंटिटी को लेके हमें आवाज़ उठानी चाहिए। जैसा कि आपने शुरू में पूछा कि मैं कहाँ से, झारखंड से रहने वाला हूँ बिल्कुल, और झारखंड के एक बहुत छोटे से गांव, रामगढ़ में एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट है, वहाँ पे एक छोटे से गांव से मैं अकेला उस गांव का लड़का हूँ जो बाहर निकल कर, यानी गांव से बाहर आकर जो है दिल्ली में पढ़ाई कर रहा हूँ, या फिर पढ़ने के लिए आया। जब दिल्ली पढ़ने के लिए आया तो जामिया में जो है मैंने एंट्रेंस एग्ज़ाम दिया, और फिर वो एग्ज़ाम नहीं निकला, एंट्रेंस जो है मैंने नहीं निकाल पाया, क्योंकि मेरा बैकग्राउंड मदरसे से था, और जिसकी वजह से मदरसे में पढ़ाई कंप्लीट करने के फ़ौरन बाद दिल्ली आया था। तो मेरे पास 1 साल का जो है पूरा टाइम था, 1 ईयर का। तो मुझे लगा कि मुझे 1 साल कुछ करना चाहिए। मैं उस 1 साल में बीपीओ में जॉब किया, और वहाँ से मैंने पैसे कमाए। मैं अपने घर से बोला, क्योंकि मैं जिस मदरसे में पढ़ रहा था वहाँ से जब पढ़ के मैं दिल्ली आया था, तो तकरीबन 8 से 9 साल का जो है वो टाइम, वो पूरा पीरियड था मदरसे के एजुकेशन का। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि 8 से 9 साल का जो टाइम था उसमें मेरी फैमिली जो है मुझे पैसे दे के पढ़ा रही थी, हर मंथ मुझे पैसे देती थी। तो मुझे ऐसा फ़ील हुआ कि अब मुझे जो है घर से पैसे नहीं लेना चाहिए, और मुझे खुद कुछ करना चाहिए। अब मैं 1 साल अगर मैं पढ़ भी नहीं रहा हूँ, और मैं मतलब सिर्फ़ तैयारी करना है मुझे, और मैं दिल्ली में रह रहा हूँ और घर से पैसा लूँ, तो शायद मैं अपने साथ इंसाफ़ नहीं कर पाऊँगा कि एक फ़ुज़ूल खर्ची जो है वो होगा, घर वाले परेशान होंगे। उन्होंने मुझे बाहर रख के पढ़ाया, और ये उम्मीद लगाए हुए थे मेरे फैमिली की, जब ये मदरसे से पढ़ के आएगा तो खुद का स्कूल है वो वहाँ पे पढ़ा लेगा, कोई बिज़नेस सेटअप कर लेगा। मतलब आगे हायर एजुकेशन के लिए वो दिल्ली कभी तैयार नहीं थी। मेरी अम्मी, क्योंकि मैं अकेला बेटा हूँ, तो वो तैयार नहीं थी, जिसकी वजह से फिर भी मैं ज़िद करके दिल्ली आया और बीपीओ में जॉब किया, पैसे कमाए, और मुझे ऐसा लगा कि जो पैसे मेरे पास हैं वो कहीं न कहीं जो है मैं 3 साल ग्रेजुएशन कर लूँगा। लेकिन जब जामिया में एडमिशन लेने के बाद देश का सिचुएशन इतना ख़राब था, जेएनयू में नजीब अहमद जो है वो गायब हो गए थे, जेएनयू से आज तक नहीं मिले हैं, और उससे एक कनेक्शन जो है वो जुड़ता चला गया। मोमेंट में मैं सेंट्रल कैंटीन पे चाय पी रहा हूँ, तो लोग वहाँ पे नारे लगा रहे हैं। मैं बिल्कुल नया था, मैं सोचता था कि ऐसा क्या हो रहा है ये? क्यों ये इस तरह से कर रहे हैं? जब मैं बहुत जानने की कोशिश किया कि क्या मामला है, तो पता चला कि जेएनयू का एक स्टूडेंट है, बदायूं के रहने वाले हैं, वो पढ़ने के लिए आए थे, वो जेएनयू से गायब हो गए हैं। कुछ फासिस्ट ताकतें जो हैं वो उस पे हावी हुई। साफ-साफ अगर ये कहा जाए कि जो है एबीवीपी और बीजेपी के लोग जो हैं इसमें शामिल हैं, तो कोई एतराज़ नहीं होगा। तो जब ये सिचुएशन, ये सारे इश्यू को, पूरे जो नजीब का जो पूरा मामला था, जब हमने इसको देखा तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि हमको भी जो है उसमें शरीक होना चाहिए। एटलीस्ट हम कुछ बोल नहीं सकते हैं, हम इनके पीछे नारा को ही रिपीट करेंगे, या फिर अगर जामिया से बाहर कहीं पे मूवमेंट होता है, इंडिया गेट पे, पार्लियामेंट स्ट्रीट पे, जंतर मंतर पे, सीबीआई हेडक्वार्टर के पास, तो मुझे एटलीस्ट वहाँ जाना चाहिए। तो वहाँ से जो है मेरा जो है मूवमेंट से और एजिटेशन से जो है वो अ, रिलेशन बना और मैं धीरे-धीरे चलता चला गया। फिर इसी तरह से मॉब लिंचिंग हो रहे थे देश में, और मॉब लिंचिंग पे भी जो है वो काफ़ी सारे आवाज़ें उठाई जा रही थी दिल्ली की सड़कों पे। इसी तरह रेप पे जो है आसिफा का मामला आया था, तो उसमें तो कई सारे उन्नाव के जो केसेज़ थे उसमें जो है मैं इन्वॉल्व होता गया, और धीरे-धीरे जो है वो पूरे तरीके से जो है वो एक्टिविज़्म में इन्वॉल्व हो गया। उसी दरमियान सीए और एनआरसी का पूरा मूवमेंट आया। सीए एनआरसी के मूवमेंट में जो है एक काम करने का मौका मिला। अब तक जो है हम अ, ये था कि प्लान करते थे जामिया के स्टूडेंट कि हाँ, हमें मूवमेंट करना है, जामिया में ही करना है, किसी इतना बड़ा मास लेवल का जो है मूवमेंट करने का मौका नहीं मिला था। हम जामिया में, क्योंकि पॉलिटिकली इतना ज़्यादा लोग अवेयर नहीं हैं, वो ज़्यादा पॉलिटिक्स में इन्वॉल्व नहीं रखते हैं, एक्टिविज़्म में, तो जिसका एक कुछ गिने-चुने लोग थे। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि सीए मूवमेंट है, एक माइनॉरिटी इंस्टीट्यूट है, और कहीं न कहीं लोगों के जो है वो अटैचमेंट और इमोशन है, कि तो उससे जो है लोगों को मोबिलाइज़ करने में बहुत ईज़ी हुआ, और एक मास मूवमेंट खड़ा करने के लिए जो है हम लोगों ने पूरी तरीके से कोशिश किया। आपने जो है जितनी भी एनर्जी है पूरा सर्व किया कि एक मास मूवमेंट जो है वो किसी तरह से खड़ा हो सके, जिसमें हम लोगों को कामयाबी भी मिली। और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि जामिया के मूवमेंट, जो जामिया से जो मूवमेंट शुरू हुआ था, वो फिर पूरे देश के कोने-कोने में जो है वो मूवमेंट फैला। और इतना ही नहीं हुआ कि उस पूरे मूवमेंट को जो है वो जब पूरे पूरे इंडिया में फैल गया, तो उसमें महिलाओं ने जो अपना रोल अदा किया, जो किरदार अदा किया, वो काबिल-ए-तारीफ़ है, वो काबिल-ए-सताइश है कि इतनी खूबसूरती के साथ घर से सड़कों पे निकल कर जो है एक मूवमेंट को चलाना। कहा जाता है कि औरतें घर को बहुत अच्छे तरीके से चलाती हैं, बहुत अच्छे तरीके से डिज़ाइन करती हैं, लेकिन अब मैं ये बात कहना चाहूँगा कि औरतें सिर्फ़ घर ही नहीं चलाती हैं, औरतें जो है वो सड़कों को भी आबाद करती हैं, और औरतें जो है देश को बनाने में भी अपना योगदान देती हैं। जिस तरह से एक माँ अपने बच्चे को के लिए ये ख़्वाहिश रखती है कि मेरा बच्चा पढ़े, लिखे और आगे बढ़े, इसी तरह औरतें जो हैं अगर अपने दिल में इस बात को रखती हैं कि मेरा देश जो है वो बचा रहे, देश का लोकतंत्र ब बचा रहे, देश की एकता और अखंडता वो बचा रहे, लोगों के अधिकार बचे रहें, उसके लिए भी औरतें जो अगर सड़कों पे आएँगी और सड़कों पे निकल कर आई हैं, तो ऐसा लगता है कि देश जो है वो खूबसूरती की तरफ बढ़ सकता है, और एक खूबसूरत देश बन सकता है, और वो देश बन सकता है जिसके ख्वाब हमारे बुज़ुर्गों ने देखा था। अब इस सिचुएशन में ये है कि तंत्र है, एक ऐसा, मतलब कि देश का जो माहौल है फिलहाल, मोमेंट अभी भी चल रहे हैं, लेकिन फिर भी जो है अ, फ़ासिस्ट ताकतें हैं वो अभी जो है रुकने का नाम नहीं ले रही है। वो धीरे-धीरे कुछ न कुछ मतलब कि हर रोज़ कुछ न कुछ करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। तो जो भी फ़ासिस्ट ताकतें हैं, वो कभी भी जो है समाज नहीं बदल सकते हैं। मतलब समाज को चेंज नहीं ला पाते हैं, और समाज को फ़ासिस्ट नहीं बना सकेंगे। कोई भी तंत्र हो, वो कभी भी समाज को जो है वो फ़ासिस्ट नहीं बना पाएगा, लेकिन इतना ज़रूर ताकत होता है कि वो लोगों को चुप करा देते हैं। यानी कुछ लोगों के मुँह में निवाला डालकर चुप करा देते हैं, कुछ लोगों के जेब में पैसे डालकर चुप करा देते हैं, और फिर भी अगर लोग इसके बावजूद चुप नहीं होते हैं, तो फिर उनको जो है वो काले कानून का सहारा लेकर उनको चुप कराने की कोशिश की जाती है। इसी की एक कड़ी है, अब जब हम चौथी बरसी पे जब गौरी लंकेश जी की बात कर रहे हैं, उनको याद कर रहे हैं, उनके शहादत दिवस को मना रहे हैं, तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि गौरी लंकेश को बिल्कुल बुलेट के थ्रू मारा गया, लेकिन आज भी लोग उनको, उनके जिस्म को मार दिए हैं, लेकिन उनकी सोच को नहीं मारे हैं, और उनके जो विचार हैं उसको नहीं मारे हैं, और उसकी विचार आज भी आज़ादी के साथ ज़िंदा है। और उसी विचार को लेके हम लोग जो है वो आगे बढ़ना चाहते हैं, और उसी विचार को आगे बढ़ाना चाहते हैं, जो विचार गौरी लंकेश का था। और सिर्फ़ इतना कह सकते हैं कि आप इंसान को बुलेट के थ्रू मार सकते हैं, लेकिन विचार को नहीं मार सकते हैं, क्योंकि विचार हमेशा बुलेट प्रूफ होता है। आप कभी भी विचार को ख़त्म नहीं कर सकते हैं, और इसी तरह का जो है विचार वो गणेश शंकर का रहा था, इसी तरह का जो विचार जो है वो महात्मा गांधी का विचार था जिनको मारा गया। तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि आज भी ये विचार जिंदा हैं और आइंदा आने वाले वक्त में भी जो है, चाहे वो गौरी लंकेश का विचार हो, चाहे वो महात्मा गांधी का विचार हो, चाहे वो गणेश शंकर का विचार हो, तमाम विचार हमेशा जिंदा रहेंगे। अगर आप उनको कानून के तहत जो है वो दबाने की कोशिश करेंगे, तो वो नहीं दबने वाले हैं। अगर आप उनको जो है मारकर, उनके जिस्म को मारकर, हम लोगों के जिस्म को मारकर विचार को अगर आप दबाने की कोशिश करेंगे, तो कभी भी विचार जो है वो नहीं दबेगा और विचार जो है हमेशा फलता और फूलता है। जब हम कानून की बात कर रहे हैं, तो हमें ये भी सोचने की ज़रूरत है कि आज देश में जिस तरह के कानून लाए जा रहे हैं, खासकर जिस तरह के कानून में अमेंडमेंट किया जा रहा है, मैं यूएपीए की बात कर रहा हूँ, नागरिकता संशोधन कानून की बात कर रहा हूँ, मैं कृषि कानून की बात कर रहा हूँ। लेकिन ये सारे कानून जो है वो अगर अमेंडमेंट हो रहे हैं या इस कानून को जो है सत्ता अपनी ताकत के ज़रिए जो है वो लाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, लागू करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, तो इसके पीछे सिर्फ़ एक ही मकसद है। वो मकसद ये है कि डिसेंट के आवाज़ को दबाने के लिए। और अगर डिसेंट की आवाज़ को ये लोग कैसे दबाएँगे? मैंने शुरू में कहा या तो मार के दबाएँगे, या तो मुँह में रोटी डालकर दबाएँगे, या जेब में पैसे डालकर दबाएँगे। अगर इससे भी नहीं मानते हैं तो फिर ये जो है कानून के ज़रिए डराने का काम करेंगे। काले कानून का नतीजा जो है आप अगर देखेंगे, मैं दिल्ली राइट्स की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ। आप जब देखेंगे कि हिंदुस्तान की जेलों में जो है वो आज भी ऐसे बहुत सारे लोग इस काले कानून के शिकार हैं। यूएपीए के शिकार हैं जो जेल में बंद हैं। आज मैं इसके लिए खुशी मनाता हूँ कि एटलीस्ट कम से कम लोग हम लोगों के लिए बोल रहे हैं। लेकिन ऐसे बहुत सारे लोग हैं जेलों में जिनके लिए लोग बोलते नहीं है, जिनको लोग याद नहीं करते, जो लोगों को मालूम नहीं होता और जिनको अच्छे वकील नहीं मिल पाते हैं कि वो केस को फ़ॉलो कर सके और वो 10 साल, 15 साल, 20 साल जेल में जो है गुज़ारते हैं। अपना कीमती वक़्त जो है अपनी उम्र के जो है एक सुनहरा वक़्त जो है वो जेल में गुज़ारते हैं और फिर बेगुनाह साबित होके जेल से बाहर आते हैं। तो मुझे अ, मौका है आज कि हम लोगों को उनको भी याद करने का कि हम उनके बारे में भी बात करें और उनके बारे में भी सोचें और गौर-फ़िक्र करें कि आखिर ये कब तक चलेगा कि इस तरह से बेगुनाहों को पकड़ के आप जेलों में डाल दें और फिर उन पे काले कानून को जो है वो थोप दिया जाए। इस काले कानून के शिकार कौन लोग हैं या कौन लोग होते हैं, ये भी समझने की ज़रूरत है। ये काले कानून के शिकार वो लोग होते हैं, जो तो गरीब होता है या फिर वो लोग होते हैं जो अपने अधिकार की बात करते हैं, जो अपनी आइडेंटिटी की बात करते हैं, जो देश को बचाने के लिए, देश को खूबसूरत बनाने की बात करते हैं। वो लोग जिनके अधिकारों को छीना जाता है। सपोज़ दैट आप आदिवासी को देखें, उनकी ज़मीन की लड़ाई है, उनकी आइडेंटिटी की लड़ाई है। आप अगर इसी तरह से दलित समुदाय को देखेंगे, उनकी अपनी आइडेंटिटी की लड़ाई है, अपनी जो है वो अधिकार की लड़ाई है, उनको जो है इक्वालिटी और दर्जे की जो लड़ाई है, जिस तरह से उनको समझा जाता है, वो चाहते हैं कि हमें भी इंसान समझा जाए और हमें भी बराबरी में लाकर खड़ा किया जाए। तो जब वो अपने अधिकार या फिर मुस्लिम की बात हो तो मुस्लिम जो है अपनी जब अधिकार की और अपनी आइडेंटिटी की बात करता है तो फिर उन पे जो है इस तरह के क कानून जो है वो थोपे जाते हैं और उन पे जो है उस कानून का जो है वो शिकार बनाया जाता है। जब ये सब कुछ हो रहा है कि आप जो है जल-जंगल की बात नहीं कर सकते हैं, आप जो है वो अपनी पहचान की बात नहीं कर सकते हैं, आप अपनी ज़मीन को बचाने की बात नहीं कर सकते हैं। तो अगर आप करेंगे तो आपको जेल में जो है डाल दिया जाएगा। लेकिन फिर भी जो है आज बहुत लिमिटेड लोग, बहुत गिने-चुने लोग, बहुत क्रीम लोग और जो हैं जो आज भी इन चीज़ों पे जो है मुसलसल जिद्दोजहद कर रहे हैं, कोशिश कर रहे हैं और जो है आवाज़ें बुलंद कर रहे हैं और सरकार की आँख में आँख डाल के, सत्ता के आँख में आँख डाल के ये बात करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि तुम अगर हमें डराने की कोशिश करोगे, तुम अगर हमें धमकाने की कोशिश करोगे, तो हम डरने वाले नहीं हैं। अगर तुम हमें मारने की कोशिश करोगे, तब भी हम डरने वाले नहीं हैं। अब इस पूरे सिस्टम को आप देखें कि आखिर जब काले कानून का इस्तेमाल कैसे किया जाता है और कौन लोग करते हैं और उसको कौन लोग हवा देता है, ये भी समझने की ज़रूरत है। ये जो अंग्रेज़ जब इस देश से गए, तो जो पूरा जो है पुलिस का जो सिस्टम है, जो आईएएस है, पीसीएस है, जो पूरी सिविल सर्विस है, वो अंग्रेज़ जो थोप के गए, जो आइडियाज़ उनके थे, वही आज भी चल रहे हैं। मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि पूरा पुलिस सिस्टम जो है वो सड़ चुका है। पुलिस का जो पूरा सिस्टम है वो एकदम जो है मतलब कि आए दिन मैं ये बात इसलिए कह रहा हूँ कि अ, कोर्ट जो है हर दिन मतलब कि उनको लथाड़ लगा रहा है, उनसे सवाल पूछ रहा है, ये कह रहा है बार-बार कोर्ट कि आप जो है टैक्स पेयर के पैसे जो है वो बर्बाद कर रहे हैं, आप फेयर इन्वेस्टिगेशन नहीं कर रहे हैं, आप जो है बेगुनाह लोगों पे जो है वो ज़ुल्म कर रहे हैं। ये मैं नहीं कह रहा हूँ, ये कोर्ट कह रहे हैं, ये कोर्ट के कमेंट्स हैं इस तरह के। तो आप ये समझ सकते हैं कि पुलिस सिस्टम कितना ज़्यादा सड़ चुका है और उनसे इंसाफ की उम्मीद लगाना जो है मुझे नहीं लगता है कि उनसे इंसाफ मिल सकता है या वो हमारे साथ, क्योंकि वो पूरी थ्योरी जो है वो अंग्रेजों की थ्योरी है और वही चला आ रहा है और उसको ये लेकर ढो रहे हैं। तो जरूरत हमें यह है कि हम इस पे भी बात करें, हम इसके पुलिस सिस्टम के रिफॉर्म पे बात करें, हम उसके चेंजेस पे बात करें कि आखिर ये सिस्टम कैसे चेंज हो और कैसे बदले, ताकि कम से कम एटलीस्ट बेगुनाह लोग तो नहीं फंसे। कम से कम आप जिसको उठाते हैं, जिसपे एलिगेशन लगाते हैं, आप उसको इस तरह से मेंटली एंड फिजिकली टॉर्चर तो कम से कम ना करें। इस तरह की चीजें जो है इस सिस्टम को चेंज करने की जरूरत है, इस सिस्टम पे भी बात करने की जरूरत है। यदि अगर हम इस सिस्टम पे बात नहीं करते हैं, अगर हम इस सिस्टम को चेंज करने की बात नहीं करते हैं, तो आने वाले वक्त में मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि देश की जेलों में जो है वो क्रिमिनल नहीं होंगे, देश के जेलों में जो है वो छात्र होंगे, वो जो है शिक्षक होंगे और वो बुद्धिजीवी लोग होंगे। और जेल में की लाइब्रेरी में किताबें नहीं मिलेंगी, बल्कि जेल की लाइब्रेरी में जो है इस तरह के छात्र और जो है टीचर्स और जो है बुद्धिजीवी लोग मिलेंगे, जो है पाए जाएंगे। इतना ही नहीं, आपको मैं ये भी बताऊं कि हम एक ऐसे देश में रह रहे हैं जहां पे जो है जिसके संसद में जो है वो ऐसे टेरर एक्यूज चार्जशीटर्स को जो है वो पार्लियामेंट मेंबर बना के बैठाया जाता है और वो छात्रों को और बुद्धिजीवी को और जो है टीचरों को जो है वो जेलों में डाला जाता है। तो आप देख सकते हैं ऐसा किस देश में हुआ है, ऐसा किस देश में होता है। अगर हम जब इस देश रिफॉर्म की बात करते हैं, जब हम उनकी गलत नीतियों पे सवाल पूछते हैं, तो हमें आतंकवादी कहा जाता है। पता नहीं, मुझे आजकल बोलने में भी बहुत ज्यादा डर लगता है कि मेरी कौन सी स्पीच को 30-30 सेकंड काट के, 2-2 सेकंड काट के एक साथ मिलाएंगे और फिर वो ये कह देंगे कि आसिफ जो है देश के खिलाफ जो है और वो जो है इसके सपोर्ट कर रहा है और ये कर रहा है और वो कर रहा है। तो इस तरह से मुझे बोलने में भी आजकल यही सबसे बड़ा मसला है कि बोलने में भी लोगों को जो है डर लग रहा है कि आखिर क्या बोला जाए और क्या किया जाए। तो फासिस्ट जो पूरी सरकार है, उसकी जो पूरी नीतियां हैं, वो तमाम चीजें जो है वो बदलने की जरूरत है, उसके खिलाफ मुसलसल आवाज उठाने की जरूरत है, उसके रिफॉर्म पे बात करने की जरूरत है। और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि आगे चलकर हम तमाम लोग एक साथ एक प्लेटफॉर्म पर आएंगे। हमारे आइडियोलॉजी अलग हो सकते हैं, हमारे सोच अलग हो सकते हैं, लेकिन हम मुद्दे पे, हम ह्यूमन राइट्स के इश्यूज पे, हम जो है हेट क्राइम पे, हम जो है छात्रों के मुद्दों पे, हम जो है महिलाओं के मुद्दों पे, और हम जब देश की लोकतंत्र पे एक साथ एक प्लेटफॉर्म पर खड़े होकर जो है देश की सत्ता को जो है इस बात की चुनौती देंगे कि आने वाले वक्त में, क्योंकि हिटलर की भी हुकूमत थी, वो ज्यादा दिन नहीं चली और वो भी खत्म हो गई। जब मैं इस्लाम की तारीख को पढ़ता हूँ और जब उसकी हिस्ट्री को पढ़ता हूँ, तो मुझे पता चलता है कि जब इस्लाम आया था तो वहां फिरौन भी था, नमरूद भी था। उन तमाम लोगों की खात्मा हुई, जो भी लोग जुल्म और ज्यादती कर रहे थे, जो भी नहिते इंसान पे जुल्म कर रहे थे, ज्यादती कर रहे थे, वो तमाम लोग खत्म हो गए हैं। तो मुझे आने वाले वक्त में एकदम पूरा यकीन है, अपने रब्बुल इज्जत पे ये भरोसा है कि यकीनन ये फासिस्ट गवर्नमेंट जो है जिस तरह से आवाजों को दबाने के लिए, डिसेंट को आवाजों को दबाने के लिए, लोगों को डराने के लिए जो है जो जुल्म और ज्यादती कर रही हैं और काले कानून का इस्तेमाल कर रही हैं और लोगों को जो है वो दबाया जा रहा है, उनके अधिकारों को दबाया जा रहा है, तो वो जल्द ही जो है ये सारी चीजें खत्म होगी। इसमें अल्लाह की मदद और उसकी नुसरत भी हमारे साथ आएगी। मैं इतना ही कहना चाहता हूँ कि आज भी जो है कि इंडिया की सड़कों पे जो है वो आंदोलन चल रहे हैं, किसान आंदोलन है, और कोई भी ऐसे मोमेंट्स अगर वो चल रहे हैं, अभी रिसेंटली जो है राबिया जो है दिल्ली पुलिस में थी, डिफेंस में, उसको जो है मार दिया गया। तो इन तमाम लोगों के अधिकारों के लिए आवाज उठानी चाहिए और इसके सॉलिडेरिटी में हमें खड़ा होना चाहिए। और जब हम लोग इस तरह के अधिकार की बात करते हैं, तो इस देश की जो सबसे बहुसंख्यक समुदाय हैं, वो कभी जो है जिनका सॉलिडेरिटी और समर्थन जो है इस देश को नहीं मिलता है, इस देश को जो है नुकसान हमेशा जो है वो पढ़े लिखे लोगों से, उन गरीब पढ़े लिखे लोगों के साइलेंस से हुआ है, गरीब के वायलेंस से कभी नहीं हुआ है, और जो है नहीं बोलने के वालों के वायलेंस से नहीं हुआ, बल्कि पढ़े लिखों के जो है वो साइलेंस से हुआ है। तो हमें जरूरत है कि हम जो है अपनी आवाज को बुलंद करें, बोलते रहें, अधिकार की लड़ाई को लड़ते रहें। यकीनन मैं एज ए स्टूडेंट अभी जिस तरह से खड़ा हूं, आने वाले वक्त में भी जब भी इस देश को जरूरत पड़ेगा, जब भी इस देश को बनाने में, देश के लोकतंत्र को मजबूत करने में, न्यायपालिका को मजबूत करने में, लोगों के इंसाफ के लिए, उनके अधिकार के लिए जब भी हमें खड़े होने की जरूरत पड़ेगी, इंशाल्लाह मैं जो है पहली सफ में जो है वो खड़ा दिखूंगा। मैं सिर्फ इस शेर के साथ अपनी बात खत्म करता हूं कि सुर ही ना मिले जिससे वो साज बदल डालो, और जो राज न रख पाए वो हम राज बदल डालो। दुश्मन के इरादों को अगर करना है नाकाम, तुम खेल वही खेलो, अंदाज बदल डालो। ऐ दोस्त करो हिम्मत, कुछ दूर सवेरा है, अगर चाहते हो मंजिल तो परवाज बदल डालो। थैंक यू, थैंक यू।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आसिफ, थैंक यू सो मच। आई मीन आई एम जस्ट अमेज्ड, आई डिड दिस इंटरव्यू विद आसिफ एंड आसिफ ने जो बात रखी, उन्हें अपनी बात नहीं रखी. He didn't talk about what he went through in jail. He didn't talk about the incarceration period and what that meant to him, but he talked about very, very basic issues. And I think this is the sheer courage we are seeing from young people, and which is why we wanted to pay a living tribute to these iconic young leaders who've been incarcerated for over 13 months and whom Gauri, we are sure, would have been paying tribute to. Devangana, Kalita, artist in prison, storyteller, Pinjatod activist, MPhil, a PhD student, and a very, very vocal student leader in Delhi. She was also released from jail on June 17th after the judgment that was passed on June 15th by the Delhi High Court. And we'd love to hear from her. Whatever you like, Devangana, like you said, whatever your thoughts, whatever your thoughts on the challenges for all of us. And I'd like to say that after Devangana and Natasha both speak, and you have the time that you want to speak for both of you, Gauri Lankesh will give her response. Devangana.
Thank you firstly to the organizers of this event. It's we really feel honored to be here today. And actually, just like today, while thinking about the event, just like the memory from 4 years back really kind of suddenly came back as this kind of deja vu in terms of, because when Gauri's assassination happened, that was the time when Pinjatod as a women's students collective was also just beginning. It had just been a 1 year or a couple of years. And it was also in the aftermath of this kind of confrontation and violence which one was facing from AVVP in campus, where like somebody who was part of a street play had been abducted and threatened by AVVP. And later on, many of our members would constantly have AVVP men following them saying like, Bharat Mata ki jai. So like the whole university space had become this hostile space where you saw that how when one came together collectively to kind of threaten this Hindutva politics, that's the kind of, and one saw this is what, you are faced against. And I think Gauri's assassination was that frightening moment when you saw the extent to which it could go. You can literally be like, this is what we are faced with when we are slowly coming together, fighting various battles in our homes to, as young women students, to even come out on the streets. Some of us couldn't even come out on the streets. We have to be like, hidden somewhere, but still finding our own ways of organizing and collectivizing. So in that sense, at that point, what happened to Gauri was deeply frightening and deeply devastating. But yet at the same time, it was also a moment of coming together to be like, we have to be there for one another, come together for one another to be able to face this. And we won't be able to face this alone. And it is only when we come together that we'll be able to, face this. And Gauri, that's why also became an inspiration, a very like a, where this is the worst which can happen to you, but you also know how people have stood up to it. And I think that is why also someone like Gauri was so frightening for this regime, for this apparatus. Like, why did they have to murder her? Why did they have to assassinate her? Because she so strongly stood against some of the extreme violence that this regime represents. The kind of, as a woman, how she spoke out against so many of the atrocities that this regime perpetrated against caste violence, against the Hindutva regime, against the kind of, hatred which in the name of religion is perpetuated. So in that sense, how Hindutva ideology basically has all these Lakshman Rekhas for women, and Gauri, I think, transgressed all of them. And these Lakshman Rekhas exist depending on who you are as a woman. For upper caste women, you have to be protected. You have to be kept under a fold. As a Dalit woman, you have to fall under the exploitative sexual and economic regimes of exploitation and oppression. As a Muslim woman, you don't even really kind of like exist. You can only be sexualized or be made target of this kind of brutal communal violence, or your struggles within the community will be appropriated and misrepresented in the most vicious ways, as we saw happen under this regime. So in that sense, yeah, Gauri is that representation against, is representative of those struggles against these Lakshman Rekhas, which are imposed on women, which are imposed in various different ways for depending on, where you exist in the caste, class, race, spectrum as a woman. And which also I think we see intensifying over the last, in terms of the, when women are stepping out of their households, fighting various battles within that, and then coming out, the kind of attack that we see, there is kind of attack in this most kind of, overt ways in what we saw happen with the anti-CAA movement, where so many Muslim women came out on the streets, or Asif was talking about Jamia, how one of the protests organized by the women's hostel in Jamia was such an important precursor to the way things took off in the movement. So and when kind of women are coming out on the streets from various different identities, the kind of backlash that we are seeing, and this is very kind of overt in cases like the CAA and RC movement, where literally a vibrant movement was completely attacked through a program, through riots, and after that kind of completely brutalizing the Muslim community and picking up so many young men and a few women who were part of the protests during that process. And besides that, also there is the way in which a repression is happening in terms of the everyday life and everyday our existence in itself. If we look at what happened in the pandemic, women have faced some of the most brunt of people who have completely disappeared from the workforce, rising levels of unemployment. You see it is the women's participation in the workforce which has reduced the most, and also whatever work remains is in this highly precarious domains, where, and again, it is mostly the working class, Dalit, Muslim, or Adivasi women who find themselves in these domains. And also, something as one is something like the Asha or the Anganwadi workers, who form some of the most base network in some sense of the frontline response to the pandemic. And yet in some ways they are really subsidizing the whole care economy. अपने घर का भी घर नहीं सिर्फ संभाल रही है, पूरा स्टेट का जो हेल्थ रेस्पॉन्स पेंडेमिक है उसको सब्सिडाइज कर रही है. एंड येट वी हैव सीन how the state has clamped down on the demands by ASHA workers, by Anganwadi workers for better wages, really, because they are seen as people who as women should be just giving all this subsidized labor to the state and to care of the public. Or when what one saw happen in Hathras, and also after that the arrests that happened when there was an outrage. I think for us when we were in prison, really, I remember after reading about the brutality of that incident, to then after a few days see the photo of this protest gathering in Jantar Mantar, and that was just really uplifting. We're because after this kind of complete feeling like everything is falling apart, how will people come together again? That moment was very important, and one has seen again the kind of backlash that is happening with regard to whenever people are speaking out against caste-based sexual violence. Or what earlier in the video was also shown, how threatening it is to the state to see women make their own choices about whom they want to love or what religion they want to follow, in these anti-conversion laws that we are seeing that are being implemented in one state after another, where the fact that women want to fall in love with somebody who this regime wants to completely dehumanize and demonize, that is extremely frightening for this ideology, for Hindutva, for RSS, that, and even again, when we were in prison, one was reading about these horrific arrests, all like the Muslim men who were being arrested and put in prisons without having very limited access to kind of judicial remedy, almost only after reaching the high courts, where most of them, like men, receive bail. But one thing which kind of stood out in there was how in so many of the cases, young women from villages, from small towns, were coming and asserting that, this is, I have not been forced into this. This is my agency. Or like, almost these Bollywood-like scenes where you have vigilante groups barging into marriages, where women are asserting that, no, I love this man and this is my choice and I have decided to marry him. So in that sense, we also see, that's where we see why Gauri was frightening to people, and what her, what she represents, how it is flourishing in different ways in various domains and of struggle and resistance, which might be on the streets, which might be in our relationships of love and care, which might be in our workplaces. So it's and that is why this regime is scared of Gauri and people who kind of in their own various different ways represent the politics, ideas, and dreams which Gauri stood for. So yeah, with that, I think I would like to. And once again, it's really, it's been, feels very special to be here today. Thank you.
You are very special, Devangana, just like Asif and Natasha and all of you who've just put up with so much and still come out so smiling and so vibrant. So that is just a lovely, lovely feeling to have. And thank you for being what you are. And thank you for constantly thinking of other people all the time. And like I said, Asif, Iqbal Tanha's was the lead judgment. You had Devangana's judgment. You had Natasha's judgment. And the judgment was, I think, a couple of lines which runs through all three judgments, is the line between the constitutionally guaranteed right to protest and terrorist activity seems to be getting somewhat blurred. And if this mindset gains traction, it will be a sad day for democracy. So it was very, very good to hear this from the Delhi High Court. One just wishes that it happens faster. The hearings take place faster. People don't have to wait so long. And in Natasha's case, I don't know what to say, because we know the personal grief and loss that she has herself suffered because of the loss of her dear father, Mahavir Narwal, who himself has been an inspiration to so many of us as we grew up, and for his scientific temper, for what he stood for. And I won't say any more except to say that, yes, Gauri was both a rationalist and a journalist and a warm, loving friend and a negotiator and somebody who could get exasperated with and somebody who constantly wanted dialogue and friendship, because she wanted a conversation. Even with somebody who hated her on Facebook or everywhere, she would say, let's have a cup of tea and talk about it. Let's have a cup of coffee and talk about it. So this ability to constantly build bridges and alliances is something that she really stood for. And it's quite amazing to hear all of you. And I'm sure Natasha will be the same. Natasha, thank you very, very much. And over to you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I would also like to, first of all, congratulate all of you to organize this event. And, because one thing which also this regime wants us is to forget all of our, the beauty of the struggles and all, the people who have stood against the regime, have spoken through power, and as if that almost does not exist, that cannot exist and have not existed. It's only they want us to see the violence and the repression, which of course we need to see and struggle against. But it's also, I think, part of that struggle to keep remembering all the people and all the struggles which have happened and are happening still. So I think that is very, very important to remember all of that. And that's why it is very beautiful to, be here and be among everyone to remember Gauri and remember all the struggles which have happened in the past years. And one has also been part of. So, I mean, most of the things have been what I had in mind have been kind of said, but I think what I would like to also, just one thing which I would like to foreground, that in this struggle today, which we see this kind of increasing state repression in, of course, in ways which have been spoken about, is through like these certain kind of laws which are, put on people who dare to speak against the powers that be, or who are from like, particular identities which seek to be demonized by this regime, or people who like, are asserting their rights over their own resources, over their identities. So through these kind of what we call draconian laws, people are incarcerated. But also we need to, with that, remember the various other ways in which this state repression is increasing every day in our lives, and the kind of control this regime seeks over our everyday lives. Like, as Devangana said, these kind of laws, like these anti-conversion laws, which are popularly called anti-love jihad laws. What does it really mean? It is that, your everyday life, your choices, whom do you want to marry, whom do you want to love, these kinds of, and especially for women. And then you have the on the other hand, the kind of surveillance which is increasing on our lives through like we have seen the Pegasus scandal, but that is also still it's a one limited domain. But like I remember just I think a week back or something, there is like this big celebratory statement given by Delhi CM about, the Delhi is the city with the most number of CCTV cameras, and that is like something to be celebrated about, and that will lead to like, safety of people. But it like there are actually no studies, no reports which link like, your safety with more number of CCTV cameras. But what we do know is that that leads to much more surveillance of our everyday life in the name of security. So this kind of atmosphere of also fear which has been created in the public sphere, fear from each other, like, oh, you have to be suspicious of the other person, like, you're constantly bombarded with these messages like satark rahein, savdhan rahein. You have to constantly be suspicious of the person you are traveling with. You're seeing like unhone kya bag rakha hai, kya hai, and you have to be, have to take on this vigilante role in your everyday life in very, very micro settings as well. And then, this kind of, whoever is coming into your house, you need to install CCTV cameras. Your domestic workers need to be verified. They can be criminals, they can be terrorists, they can be Bangladeshis. So, in all this micro level, which we also need to think about how this is also like, the state kind of clamping down on our lives, on our everyday lives, how we think, and this kind of atmosphere of fear as well, which leads to, I mean, one form is this extreme violence which we see in the public sphere, which of course we can see in the case of like assassinations like Ansare, Dalborkar. But also, the other end of that is this kind of everyday fear and violence which people feel against each other, the kind of aggression we see in the public sphere. So I think that also like should be like, how do we counter that, should also be part of our thinking when we think about state repression. And then of course like and also when we talk about structural things like these anti-terror laws and other laws which kind of are so against like, the principles of justice and liberty themselves. But also the massive structural changes which are happening in the system itself, like, especially like as students, what we see in the education sector, especially like with the new education policy now, I mean, your access to education itself has been limited so much, and it is getting more and more precarious every day. Your right to employment, your right to health, in even like your life is in every way basically becoming so precarious. And that is, I mean, and you're like this kind of, which is also part of, I think, the Hindutva model which we are talking about, to like leave people being so vulnerable in their lives, so that can be like then pitted against, oh, you are facing all this because of these kind of people, and that is why your all the fear and aggressions and all that should be directed against these people, but not the state, and not the kind of what it is leading, why our lives are becoming like that. So I think that also we need to connect our everyday life and its precarity with the complete overhaul of state structure and its withdrawal from all kind of welfare domains, be it health, be it education, be it employment. And especially as young people, like after coming out, that has been one of the things, that how the world is completely like fallen apart for everyone, for like to from a personal level to like you don't know what the future holds for. So when people ask us, okay, what are your future plans, and we are like, we can't make any future plans, because it is just so completely like seems so like even from a basic level, that can we like finish a degree, can we like get a job, can we like even talk to people, I mean, it's so the field has changed so much, and I think that requires to cope with that on so many levels, that requires a coming together of people who stand on a for a particular kind of politics, and really like I think build into it the kind of care and support as well for each other. Otherwise I don't think, and that cannot be left to individual domains, that, oh, if you are friends with that person, so you talk to only that person. But it just has to be a very, very central part of our politics now, if we really need to even like even hold the ground which we already like had, or it which seems like now it's like there is no ground to hold on to. So I think, and that's what really struck me when you were talking about Gauri, that how that is the kind of person she was, right? She would want to like connect to people on that level, and I think that also one should be really seriously thinking about, even in political terms. How do we build that kind of structures for ourselves, support structures, and structures of care when we are talking about a certain kind of politics and dissent. Yeah, I think broadly I would want to say that only, and I think we would want to if there is enough time, we can we just sing a song for Gauri and everyone.
Oh yes, please, we'd love it.
Okay, so this is a Hindi not exactly translation, but a Hindi version of Bella Ciao, which some people had created, and which we used to sing in the anti-CA movement as well. Not as much actually, but yeah, often. And something which we also used to sing in jail quite a lot. So, which held us together.
It's amazing how you think of the jail as happy times sometimes.
I mean, there were also like also because we were together, and with Gulfisha and initially Safura also. So actually, very ironically, we were the only people among like with friends everyone was like in their own homes, not able to meet anyone, not able to talk to anyone. So this one friend wrote to us in a letter that, it's so ironic that you guys are only one who are with friends. So I think, yeah, that made a lot of difference. हुई सुबह मैंने देखा मेरी जान अलविदा अलविदा विदा विदा हुई सुबह मैंने देखा वही जुल्म खड़ा रूबरू था सुनो बागी ले चलो भी मेरी जान अलविदा अलविदा विदा विदा सुनो बागी ले चलो भी आज लगता है जान दूंगी मैं भी जो मर जाऊं एक बागी मेरी जान अलविदा अलविदा विदा विदा जो मर जाऊं मैं एक बागी मुझे दफनाना तुम वहीं दफनाना पर्वत में मेरी जान अलविदा अलविदा विदा विदा दफनाना पर्वत पे एक फूलों के पेड़ तले सब मुसाफिर कहते चलेंगे मेरी जान अलविदा अलविदा विदा विदा सब मुसाफिर कहते चलेंगे कितना प्यारा फूल खिला है उसी बागी का है ये फूल मेरी जान अलविदा अलविदा विदा विदा उसी बागी का है ये फूल जिसने आजादी पे मौत की कबूल
Gauri Lankesh, Zindabad.
जिंदाबाद जिंदाबाद
Wow. In living life, you embrace death. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Kavita, I don't want to spare a few seconds. I think you just have to respond immediately. Kavita.
On this very, very sad day when I lost Gauri 4 years back. But in spite of that, these three youngsters brought a smile to my face, I think, by their singing, by their work, by their passion for life, passion for justice. And, it's, I'm sitting here, I feel like crying, but at the same time, I'm smiling, witnessing these three youngsters who spoke. Thank you, Asif, Devangana, and Natasha, for paying a tribute to my sister. I'm sure if Gauri was here, she would have immediately said, I'm going to adopt you kids, because as you all know, Umar and Jignesh and Kanaya were unofficially adopted kids of Gauri. And you kids also would have been immediately taken under her wings. And, she would have met you every time she came to Delhi or wherever you are, and utilize that space and time to exchange ideas and issues and the protests, fights, whatever you stood for. That's the wonderful thing about it. Thank you so much. I'm also reminded that when you all spoke, all these three people spoke, how much Gauri wanted my daughter Isha. She would call her own daughter, of course. Wanted her to join JNU, And I used to be scared, thinking, oh my God, when I see all these people talking so openly, so much against the government or against the state, you would think, I don't want my daughter to be like that. I want her to be in a safe space. It was such a cowardly feeling of mine. But I can really hats off, and I'm mightily impressed by what all these kids stand for and what they've gone through. 13 months in jail. And Devangana, in fact, I've seen her drawings, and I had shown Isha when it had come in the newspapers. See, look at this kid, and it's wonderful. And I'm happy Tista you brought these three together. And I can only imagine the kind of things that's happening in this country. If a student goes on a protest or voices out anything opposite to the government, they're arrested under UAPA Act and called terrorists or jihadis. How can we ever let them, let youth stand up and have a voice if you continue to do this? I mean, Gauri had at least 55 years of being a journalist, spoken, wrote thousands of articles. And in spite of that, she fought valiantly till the end, I think. But if these kids at 20, 23 or whatever, if they're squashed and made to feel like you can't speak, how will a country ever be democratic, or how will we stand up to a constitution? I think it's a very, very dangerous space we are in. And on speaking of this, thank you again, Asif and Devangana and Natasha. I'm also happy that if maybe some of you know and some of you might not know, that Gauri's name has been dedicated for this day in the city of Barnaby in Canada. When I had posted this, when Tista shared this news with me last couple of days back, I posted it, I tweeted it and all that. And I heard just so many, good, of course, congratulatory messages, but also at the same time, such vindictive and hate-filled replies saying what did she deserve and things like that. For that, I really would like to read what the city of Barnaby had written in the proclamation, actually, and what some of the views from the citizens there. So, we did not want Gauri Lankesh Day because we hope to change the mindset of those who took her life. We wish to change things at the grassroots level. In other words, it is not easy to get those in power to let go of their privilege willingly. That is why only ordinary people can stand up against oppression and for the real India which people like Gauri represent. I would like to say, when people ask me, the press asked me, how do you feel that September 5th has been declared as Gauri Day? I felt I'm happy, but at the same time, I'm happy things are being recognized for what she stood for, and that is what it should continue. And one more person there called Daliwal, a citizen from Barnaby, Canada, has said he had never heard of my sister or her murder. When he came to know about it, he wholeheartedly supported September 5th as Gauri Day. He has said it is our duty to support human rights and the right of the people to know all the facts, which is the job of the journalist to provide. Now even if unless the media is being stifled so much, I think, even if, as you've been reading, so many media houses who question the government of the smallest thing are being raided, being harassed for many days. These are the things which will make people think, should we write at all? Should we, expose this corruption at all? This is all again, the freedom of press is getting more and more dwindling, I think, which is very scary. And in fact, one of on witnessing this hate, polarization, Islamophobia in every nook and corner, and even on WhatsApp group or even in your own houses, if you think about it, there's always somebody who's against your, democratic opinions. They say, well, this kind of thing has been seeping so widely in the last few years. A young girl asked me, what's so great about this country? I believe the answer to this is the young people such as Asif, Natasha, Kanaya, Umar, Jignesh, and several others who still believe in our constitution and secularism, who will continue to fight bravely against inequalities and injustice. I sincerely hope your tribe increases. On a parting note, before that, I should thank Tista, who's wonderful because she's just accepted being the president of Gauri Memorial Trust just in August, I think. And in the matter of just about 2-3 weeks, she's managed to make these 4 weekends, different events, which are very, very thought-provoking, insightful, and makes me proud of what Tista and Gauri and what everybody is trying to do in this place. And also, finally, last night, me and Tista were talking, and she said it's a sad day because we lost Gauri, and it's very depressing, and neither of us could sleep, and we were just talking in the night. And after that, at some point in the night, I received a beautiful small poem from Tista, which made me again cry and also smile, I think. So I would like to read that in the last list. Slipping back in time and memory, holding on to sticks, not straws, grieving but not mourning ever, cause the fight, the battle, the reasoning just has to go on. Cause the fight, the battle, the reasoning just has to go on. From you as from Gauri, from me as from you and her, sisters of the heart and soul. There can be pauses, silences, but not darkness. There can be pauses, silences, but not darkness. Ever, ever. Thank you, Tista. Thank you for being here. Thank you all. It's been a wonderful, the whole 4 weeks commemorating my sister and you accommodate your friend, Gauri Lankesh. I thank you for it.
Thank you, Kavita. I just want to tell everybody that the event is only half over. We have a lovely second half, and that's going to be as meaningful, I'm sure. Before we go there, and I have the pleasure of introducing my dear friend, Senior Counsel Mihir Desai, I just want to spare a few moments for our precious Isha, because Isha, as Kavita said, was Gauri's daughter as much as Kavita's, and for her, she sent me this message. She's at a hostel just now and she can't be online just now. Asif, Devangana, Kalita, she'll be watching you later whenever she has time. But she sent this message saying that I miss Ava so much today. I wish I was there with all of you because I miss all of you, Tista. This is what she said. So then I just sent her a small message saying that, you know, Aisha, she's up there smiling and holding a protective. She's up there smiling and holding your hand always, a protective cloud and a shining star. You are always her dear, darling, precious Isha. And she said, it makes me tear up to hear that, but it's so comforting, Tista. Thank you so much. So I just, there's personal grief and there's political pain, but there's also resistance. And I think we must be able to take all of these together. Coming back to our three wonderful tribute guests today, Asif, Devangana, and Kalita, I just want to say that the amazing dignity and verve with all of you spoke today, it just does us all really proud. And hats off to your legal team as well. I just want to mention the lawyers who have silently and committedly fought all your battles, and I know there are many, many more. All of us are following them very, very closely. The one who's going to give a lecture today is one of them, Mihir Desai. I also want to mention something which is politically needs to be said today, that when it comes to Asif and Ishrat and Gulfisha, they face a particular kind of hell in prison because of they're called out and shamed for being Muslims, as Indians, as Muslims in India are today. And our prisons echo what our society is. So we need to acknowledge that as well. And the fact that Asif can speak without speaking about that, I think tells me a lot about his sense of wider commitment. Thank you very, very much. Friends, bad laws are the worst form of tyranny, it has been said. And no one better than Mihir Desai, Senior Counsel, human rights lawyer, and whose contribution to deepening and widening human rights jurisprudence in this country has been exemplary. From torture, custodial deaths, violation of Adivasi rights and environmental protection and norms, Mihir Desai has been part of efforts to ensure both accountability and justice. For us at CJP, Mihir Desai's partnership on the Gujarat mass crimes cases has been heartening and exemplary. On UAPA, draconian terror laws, Mihir Desai's stewardship of key cases of the UAPA accused in the Bhima Koregaon cases makes him the right person for today's lecture. Terror laws under a proto-fascist regime. Before I invite Mihir, I'd just like to share with friends here very interesting statistics which have been put out by the Global Terrorism Database of the Maryland Institute University in the United States. A 2004 to 2014 comparison of quote-unquote terrorist attacks in India based on the ideology of perpetrators delineates among 5,042 attacks, 42% as left-wing extremism, 22% as separatism, 35% as miscellaneous or unknown extremism, and barely 1% as Islamic. Presumably, violent and extremist attacks in the name of Hindutva, Hindu Rashtra, fall under the miscellaneous category. Just having saying that, not keeping you from our speaker, Mihir, you have all the time you need. Thank you so much for doing this for us today.
Thanks a lot, Tista, and thank you, CJP, and thank you, Gauri Memorial Trust, for having invited me here. Let me just mention one thing, Tista, before I start. There is some instability in my network, so in case there is some freezing, I'll switch over to another instrument. So it was quite inspiring listening to Asif, Devangana, and Natasha. And on a lighter note, if 1 year of imprisonment under UAPA does this to the spirits of people, I think everybody should be imprisoned under UAPA for 1 year, and rather than fighting against the law, let's just do a jail bro under UAPA. I mean, it was really inspiring too. But that was, of course, on a lighter note, because it's a very, very, very grim act under which a lot of people have been arrested and a lot of people are facing trial. But let me begin by saying that obviously a lot of tributes have been paid to Gauri. They can never be enough. I had met her a few times. I can't say that I knew her personally very well, but of course her legend lives on. And as one of you mentioned, that if she was alive today, she would be there fighting, battling it out with persons against the Hindu right-wing forces with much more vigor than what she had done. So I personally feel that it is and today being the 4th year of her assassination, this is the right time to pay a tribute to her. Of course, the tributes will never end, and I just wanted to, from my side, say that I'm very happy to have been invited and feel very privileged to have been invited for this particular occasion. Let me. I will basically, divide what I'm going to speak on UAPA into 3 different aspects. One is, of course, the whole question of looking at UAPA historically. Second is looking at the boring aspect of the actual provisions of UAPA as to what they provide and why they are so dangerous and how they have been, what is the danger within them. And the third is, of course, the whole question of placing them, locating them within the present establishment, because it is my submission that while UAPA itself was brought by the Congress regime, just as many other laws, atrocious and draconian laws, have been brought by other regimes, I think this particular regime has, and they have been, of course, abused by the earlier regimes also. It's not to give them any clean chit, but this particular regime has mastered the art of using these the UAPA and various other draconian laws in a very targeted and a very selective way, okay, which is causing, which raises the issue of doing away with UAPA immediately and now. Now, if you see, of course, UAPA is not the only draconian law. You have various other laws, such as NSA, National Security Act. You have AFSPA. You have various state government laws like Kakoka and Makoka and various other laws which exist. You have sedition, which is there. You have various other. You have PMLA, which is now being used against activists, etc. You have a stricter construction of the FCRA. You have various other laws which are draconian. I will, of course, be focusing on UAPA because today that's a task, and that's one of the laws which is being used today. Okay, so when I was talking about the history of the UAPA, now if you look at UAPA, I think we have to look at UAPA as a combination of laws which deal with 3 things. One, it deals with, of course, banning of organizations. Second, it is in effect a preventive detention law, because though technically it doesn't talk about preventive detention, essentially because the bail provisions are such that people are preventively detained for years together. So that without being charged or without being put to trial, etc., etc. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, which I feel is which we have to look at it as an anti-terror law. So this is the third thing. So you look at it as a organization, which as a law which bans organization, and a law which deals with preventive detention, and a law which deals with terror laws. Okay. Now, if you look at banning of and UAPA, in fact, in 1961 started as a law which banned organization. It was not an anti-terror law to begin with. It was a banning of organizations law. But if you look at history of banning of organization, it goes back to 1908 in India, when during the British period there was what was known as a Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1900 Act, which was brought in, which continues to exist surprisingly, but that basically allowed organizations to be banned by the state governments, by the provincial governments at that time, on the footing that they are violating the law, they are consistently acting against the interests of the state, etc., etc. They were allowed to be banned. There was no time limit for how long they could ban these organizations. They were banned. So there was a provision like there was no judicial appeal, nothing. There was no tribunal, nothing. This continues till today. Of course, this was challenged, and of course, apart from that, there were various other laws. Like those who have had the benefit of listening to Gautam Bhatia last week, okay, he had also mentioned about certain other laws, such as the governor having, the chancellor having the power to ban organizations and emergency provisions, war laws, etc., which were brought in, under one of which RSS was banned in 48, 49, and things like that. But if you come back to the 1908 Act, it was sought to be amended by the Madras government in 1951, and that was challenged in one of the first constitutional law cases which happened in the Supreme Court at that time, after the Constitution coming in. The amendment made was basically that you can ban an organization, but that organization can only be banned, okay, if it is banned, it will have to be referred to a tribunal, okay, a tribunal which would have administrative members which will look into the matter, okay. This was challenged, and the Supreme Court struck it down, saying that this kind of an amendment is invalid, because if you are banning somebody, you have to ban somebody by giving that person an opportunity of approaching the court. If you don't have a judicial oversight of ban, then that kind of a ban cannot be permitted. This was decided by the Supreme Court way back in 1952. Okay, after which, for years together, there was no other law banning the organizations. Okay. First time you have the law banning organization is UAPA in independent India. That is the present law which we are dealing with, which comes in 1967. And at that time, when the law came in 1967, it essentially dealt with two or three things. One was it said that unlawful activities are prohibited. Now, what is unlawful activity? At that time, it was defined as activities which are basically secessionist, which challenges the integrity and the boundaries of India, etc., etc. Those are unlawful activities. And unlawful organizations could be banned. Unlawful organizations were those which dealt with which dealt with unlawful activities, that is secession, etc., etc., or it consistently dealt with hate speech. So either you deal with hate speech or you deal with secession, etc., etc., and then you could be banned. You could be banned for 2 years at the maximum through a government notification. You could approach a judicial forum, and there it could be then either the ban was upheld or not upheld. So and the fine and the sentence was imprisonment for a year or so and fine. So that was how it was. It was of course a harsh law. It was a law which basically acted against the fundamental right of forming associations and all that. But compared to what it is today, it was a mild law. Okay, that is how it is. Now, if you look at how this has developed over a period of time, there have been certain amendments to this. Now, one of the amendments which has happened to this particular law is the amendment which earlier, as I mentioned, that a law could be, organization could be banned only if that organization dealt either with hate speech or with secession. Okay. But over the years, in 2004, this was amended to include even if you spread disaffection against the country. Now, this is such a wide term, disaffection against the country. This is a similar term used in sedition. okay, disaffection against the country. That was added. And in 2013, the ban period, which was earlier 2 years, was increased to 5 years. So there has been a progressive, kind of a strictness in the law which has been brought in over the last few years. In addition to this, after the POTA was repealed and UAPA was amended, okay, you also have banning of what are known as terrorist organizations. Now, this banning, I'll come to that in a little while, but this is the other thing which has been brought in, the banning of terrorist organizations. Anyway, so this is what UAPA dealt with as far as banning of organizations is concerned. As far as preventive detention laws is concerned, that is one part of UAPA. The other part of UAPA is the preventive detention. Now, Gautam spoke last week, so I don't want to add too much to it. But basically, when we talk about preventive detention laws, you had the Rowlett Act, which was way back in 1919. Before that, also you had certain acts. Preventive detention has been brought in as a part of the fundamental rights chapter in the Constitution, which is itself something which is shocking and which should be opposed. But that is there. In 1951, for the first time, you had a new preventive detention law, which was for a period of 2 years, extendable every 2 years. That was challenged. The challenge was resisted, and it was thrown out. The law came to be, said to be valid. So preventive detention was allowed for a period of 1 year. It was for a period of 1 year, but it was a temporary law for 2 years. That 2 years period kept on getting extended, got extended up to 1969. So every 2 years, the preventive detention law was extended, and it was finally repealed in 1969 to be replaced by a permanent law, which was MISA, which was a preventive detention law, the infamous MISA of the emergency period. It was actually brought in 1971. That was the first time a permanent preventive detention law was brought in. MISA, of course, came under a huge cloud during emergency, and when the new government came, they repealed MISA. But in 1980, MISA took a different form and came back as National Security Act, which continues till today. The National Security Act, under which a lot of people are being arrested, especially in Uttar Pradesh, Assam, and various other places. We heard a lot of people being arrested under NSA, which allows for 1 year's, a lot of people were arrested again, even in Kashmir when 370 was abrogated. At that time, a lot of people were detained. I mean, I wouldn't, technically the word is not arrested, technically it is detained. They were detained for 2 years, etc., for 1 year, 1.5 years, etc. Large number of people. So NSA is the preventive detention law which exists today, which essentially allows detention on the grounds not that you have committed a crime, but on the basis that you may be dangerous to society, you may commit some crime in future, you may be a threat to public order, etc., etc. So now the reason why I got a little bit into the history of NSA and preventive detention laws is because preventive detention laws, because UAPA, while not strictly speaking talking about preventive detention, effectively operates as a preventive detention law which lasts for more than 1 year. Preventive detention laws last for 1 year maximum. Okay, you can be released in 1 month, you can be released in 1 day, but maximum 1 year at the moment. These laws, UAPA, the detention lasts for much longer till the trial is over. And if you are lucky, and if you happen to go before a good judge, you have to have good legal, assistance kind of thing. You may get out earlier, but by and large, it's difficult to get out earlier. So it's seen as a preventive detention law. Now, the third thing, the third part of it is the what I would call the anti-terror law. Okay. Because anti-terror laws, because what UAPA now acts is also as an anti-terror law. Now, anti-terror laws, while there were some kind of anti-terror laws you can call AFSPA and things like that loosely as anti-terror laws, okay, because they were supposedly for attacking terrorism. the major laws, anti-terror laws, which were brought in India, start with Terrorist Affected Areas Act in 1984. Okay, this was the first law, Terrorist Affected Areas Act, which was brought in as an anti-terror law. This law, the central government could declare any area as terrorist affected area, and offences concerning waging of war against government, etc., would be tried by special courts set up in this area. That was the purpose of the Terrorist Affected Areas Act. I will not go too much into it because it was soon replaced by TADA, which was brought in 1985. Okay. TADA was the first, technically speaking, and the first long-term, anti-terror law which was brought in. Now, apart from the fact that definition of terrorism was very vague, it turned the entire jurisprudence of criminal law upside down. And that is what TADA came in 85. It was brought in again in 87. Finally lapsed in 1995. But what is important to understand is there are certain aspects of criminal jurisprudence which were completely overturned by TADA. Okay. And that caused a huge problem. The first thing was that under the criminal law, under the normal criminal law, confessions made to a police officer are never admissible as evidence. Under TADA, they were made admissible. So you beat up a person, you make him to confess something, and that will be admissible under TADA. Similarly, police remand under normal criminal laws is for 15 days. Okay. Under TADA, it was made for 30 days. Okay, extended. Police remand was extended for 30 days. And charge sheet filing normally happens within 60 days or 90 days, depending on what you are, that is a maximum period for filing a charge sheet. Under TADA, it was extended to 1 year. Okay. Similarly, the bail provisions were made very strict. Under ordinary criminal law, you can get bail after some time of imprisonment. Here it was mentioned that unless the court comes to the conclusion that the accused is not guilty of the offense and not likely to commit an offense, if he is released on bail, only then can he be released on bail. So you are turning the entire presumption of innocence upside down. You see, this is what is happening. You are turning it upside down. You are telling that unless the court comes to the
Mihir, 1 second, can I just interrupt you? I'm so sorry. I've completely slipped my mind to tell people and participants that please put your questions in the chat box. We will take questions, a Q&A with Mr. Mihir Desai at the end. So please do put your questions in the chat box. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, I should have meant.
No problem. Yeah. So what I was saying is that the presumption of innocence, which is the basis of our constitution, which is the basis of our criminal law, okay, was turned upside down as in TADA. That bail cannot be granted, okay, unless the judge comes to the conclusion that you are not guilty. This is before a trial. Okay. So how is a judge supposed to come to a conclusion that you are not guilty before a trial takes place? It's very difficult. So this made the provision of bail very difficult. The other thing which happened was the provision of anticipatory bail, which is there under the normal criminal law, was done away with under TADA. Okay. And in certain instances, the burden of proof was shifted onto the accused. Now, there were various other things under TADA which were quite this thing, but I will not go into them. But the problem which arose, one of the good things about TADA was that it had a sunset clause. That after every 2 years, TADA would be brought before the parliament. The parliament will oversee its implementation, and then will have to again pass a law extending the time for TADA for 2 years, etc., etc. So what happened was, because TADA had a sunset clause, after 85, 87, 89, 91, 93, it was brought before the parliament, and then it was renewed. By 1985, you had a situation where 76,000 persons were arrested under TADA. Okay, they were arrested not because of any terrorist activity, but they were arrested because somebody would go on strike. Somebody is protesting against price rise. Somebody is protesting against in favor of tribal rights. Gujarat had the maximum cases under TADA, maximum arrests under TADA, and there was not a single terrorist case in Gujarat up to 1985. Okay, I mean the conventional terrorist case, what we call conventional terrorism. There was not a single case. Okay? So this was the situation in 1995. 76,000 persons arrested. Tada was challenged in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court did not do anything. Supreme Court just said that no, it's a valid law. They put some, they diluted a few provisions here and there, gave certain kind of observations, but beyond that did not do anything. Tada was upheld. Okay? But that was a time when you had an NHRC, which was an independent NHRC. Okay? That was also so NHRC chairperson wrote to each MP personally, saying that when Tada comes up for renewal in 1995, do not support it. Do not support the renewal. There was a huge civil society backlash against the way Tada was going about. Huge protests. Okay, this finally led in 1995 to Tada being dropped. Okay, it lapsed. It was not renewed. So Tada regime comes to an end in 1995. Once BJP comes to power in late 90s, okay, they want to bring in such a law. They ask the law commission to prepare a report. The law commission prepares a report saying, yes, we need a anti-terror law, strict anti-terror law, etc., etc. Still, it could not be passed. 2001, two incidents happened. One is, of course, World Trade Center, and second is attack on Parliament in India. Making use of this, POTO is introduced, that is Prevention of Terrorism Act, okay, Terrorism Ordinance. That was the first thing. Now, POTO could not be converted into POTA very easily. That is, an ordinance has to be passed as a law within 6 months' time. They could not do it very easily because they were not getting sufficient votes in Rajya Sabha. So one of the first instances where the government, where the party in power ordered a joint session of parliament of Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, because there was huge opposition to POTA being passed, but because of the joint session, POTA ultimately came to be passed, and POTA came to be what it was. It was broadly on the lines of Tada with a few changes. Okay. The definition of terrorist act was expanded to not just attacks by arms, ammunition, and hazardous substances, but also by what was known as any other means whatsoever. So it became a huge, very, very, very broad definition of how do you define, terrorist act. For the first time, a terrorist act dealt with banning of organizations. So remember, Tada did not deal with banning of organization. UAPA dealt with banning of unlawful associations. POTA brought in what is known as banning of organizations for the first time. And there was a schedule given in POTA, okay, which gave list of organizations which were banned. Membership of that organization made you a criminal. This is the time for filing of this again had a sunset clause, okay. But again the bail conditions etc. were similar, and there was huge protests. You had arrests of very prominent people like Waiko etc. Who were arrested, and there was huge protests even from parties. The UPA, when it was contesting the elections, had made a promise that they will do away with POTA when they come back to power, because despite there were certain better things in POTA than in Tada. For instance, there was a review committee set up under POTA where every case under UAPA would go before that review committee, okay, and that review committee presided over by a judge of the High Court, okay, would decide whether POTA is made out or not, and only then can you continue with POTA charges. That was one thing. Second thing, there was a provision here under POTA which said that if any person is found to be maliciously prosecuted, the police officer himself can be prosecuted for maliciously prosecuting, and compensation can be given to the accused. So these were some of the provisions which were in POTA, which were not in Tada, which are better. Anyway, once UPA won the elections in 2004, POTA was repealed. Okay. But on the same day that POTA was repealed, you had UAPA brought in. POTA brought in by a backdoor method by amending the existing UAPA. Okay. So UAPA, which was not a terror law to begin with till 2004, was now made into an anti-terror law. Some of the aspects of how the definition of terrorism, etc., the banning of terrorist organization, etc., were brought in 2004 by amending UAPA. So UAPA got amended. POTA's provisions concerning terrorism were brought into UAPA, and the UAPA got amended. Even then, at that point of time, you did not have the harsh bail conditions which we find today. Okay, in UAPA, those were brought in through an amendment in 2008. Harsh bail conditions were brought in, which, as we all know, do not allow, similar to POTAs, slight change here and there, similar to POTAs, but basically don't allow for easy bail to anybody, because the judge has to come to a conclusion that prima facie a person is guilty or not guilty, etc. At the bail stage, which it becomes very difficult for them to come to. So anyway, so UAPA was amended in 2004, bringing in terrorist-related issues. In 2008, it was amended by making the bail conditions, remand conditions stringent. 2013, again, it was amended by bringing in financial aspects also into the aspect of terrorism. Terrorism earlier was only for, a kind of using arms and using weapons, so biological weapons, etc. Now even financially bringing in insecurity of the country was also brought in as part of UAPA in 2013. And 2019, again, the law was changed by the present government by allowing individuals to be named as terrorists. This was never the case. Earlier, no individual could be named as a terrorist. Now, individuals can be named as terrorists and put in a schedule. And that person, once you are named as a terrorist, you are a terrorist, and you can be immediately put behind bars forever and after. So that is that. So presently, what happened? What we are dealing with UAPA. We are dealing with UAPA, which was brought in 67, amended in 2004, 2008, 2013, and 2019. So that's what we are dealing with. Now, if you look at, and just very, very briefly, I'll tell you what these amendments, what the present law looks like. It presently, UAPA deals with 6 issues substantively. Okay. What are the 6 issues? First of all, it deals with unlawful associations. I already talked about it, what is an unlawful association, etc. So I won't go into it any further. Secondly, it talks about unlawful activities. Okay. Which anybody, it doesn't have to be an association which involves in unlawful activities, it can be anybody. Now, unlawful, there are those which try to bring about secession of any part of the country or spread disaffection, etc., which I mentioned earlier. So that's the second thing it deals with. Third thing it deals with is terrorist activity. Now, terrorist activity, the definition has been expanded beyond what it was earlier. It includes economic security. It includes any activity likely to threaten unity, integrity, security, economic security, sovereignty, or with intent to strike terror, or by using explosive, or by any other means whatsoever, or causing disruption of any supplies or services essential to the community. That means even if you go on a rasta roko or go on a strike, you can be charged charged with a terrorist activity, because disruption of supply important to the community amounts to terrorism. So terrorism, the definition has been broadened tremendously. Of course, if you go back to Natasha, Devangana, and Asif's judgment, which was given by the Delhi High Court. The Delhi High Court has rightly, made the definition very narrow of terrorism, that it has to be a violent act. It has to be against the country as a whole, not because it affects some people here and there. It has to destabilize the country, etc. So it's a very, very, very broad definition, which has been a narrow definition, which has been given by the Delhi High Court. Unfortunately, presently, the Delhi High Court judgment has been, in a sense, suspended by the Supreme Court. So we'll have to wait and watch and see what the Supreme Court says in this matter. So anyway, so terrorist activity is the other thing which is kind. Then terrorist activity need not be by terrorist organization. It can be by terrorist organization, it can be by individual, it can be by anybody. Okay, like Devangana and all were charged with. They were not charged with being members of any terrorist organization. They were charged with having indulged in terrorist activity. Similarly, terrorist organizations These are organizations named in the schedule of the Act, as I mentioned earlier. There are listed various organizations, right from some Muslim organizations to some Maoist organizations to some Northeast organizations. A large number of organizations are listed there. Then you have the fifth thing is the individual terrorists who can be charged. And the sixth thing, which I mentioned earlier, the sixth thing is what is known as terrorist gang. Nobody knows what is the definition of terrorist gang, but it is any association other than a terrorist organization, whether systematic or otherwise, which is concerned with or involved in terrorist act. Now, what this means, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, but it is likely to be used much more as time goes by. Okay. Now, there are a couple of things which are very draconian of UAPA, which I have talked about, but in the context of UAPA, let me mention. Police remand, like in POTA, is extended to 30 days, and the time of filing charge sheet is 180 days. Bail provision, as I mentioned earlier, is very, very stringent. I must mention one thing here about bail provisions. POTA had made one exception. POTA, while giving bail provision, keeping bail provisions very stringent, had said that after first year of jail, okay, you will then be governed by bail provisions which are of normal bail conditions. So after first year, your bail conditions get diluted. Okay, and you will be then normally you will get bail or not get bail on the basis of normal bail provisions, not as per the POTA bail provisions after 1 year of jail. UAPA does away with this. So what UAPA does is that 1 year provision goes, you will be governed by the stringent provisions of bail till the end of your trial. You will not be governed by diluted provisions even after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years of bail. So in that sense, it becomes much more draconian than what POTA was. Similarly, there are, review committees which were set up under POTA have been done away with here. So you don't have review committees presided over by judges which go into each individual case of UAPA to decide whether this person should actually be charged under UAPA or not. Those have been done away with under UAPA. And there is no sunset clause. So basically what I was saying was that UAPA is a much more draconian law than either TADA or POTA were, according to me. It doesn't have sunset clause. It doesn't have review committees. It doesn't have dilution of bail provisions after 1 year. It is a combination of preventive detention, banning of organizations, and anti-terror law. This is the situation. And plus, because of changes like individuals being called terrorists, etc., it is its own problems. So what I was saying is that UAPA is a much more draconian law than the earlier laws. Now, remember, the earlier laws like TADA and POTA were also challenged in the Supreme Court, but the challenges were not upheld. AFSPA was challenged, the challenge was not upheld. NSA was challenged, the challenge was not upheld. The earlier Preventive Detention Act was challenged, the challenge was not upheld. Okay, and this is a consistent view of the Supreme Court over the last 50 years. That is what has happened. Now, as I started out by saying that while many of these acts have been brought in, okay, by the earlier government, that is by the Congress, by etc., I still feel the danger with the present government is much more as far as the use of these laws is concerned. And let me just explain why I feel it is much more. First of all, okay, the abuse of UAPA has increased substantially during the last 7 years since NDA came to power. On 9/3/21, the Ministry of Home Affairs informed the Lok Sabha that between 2015 and 2019, more than 5,128 UAPA cases were registered and 7,050 persons were arrested across India. During this period, the conviction rate was only 2.19%. Okay? Now, this is the situation. Now, if you actually go, there is an NIA site because the National Investigating Agency also has a site. This says that of the 319 cases of UAPA handled by NIA, only 69 cases, that is 19%, were filed during UAPA regime.
UPA regime, and while 250 cases, that is 78%, have been filed during Modi regime. Now, we have to bear this in mind, that the two things in mind. The number of cases which have been filed in the last 7 years under UAPA is much, much more than what was filed during the UPA regime. Second thing is that the number of cases in which conspiracy is used as the only ground for arresting people is much more. For instance, in about 66% of the cases which NIA is dealing, 66% of the cases NIA is dealing, no actual incident is being, people are not charged with any actual incident of violence, that they have committed violence, like the Bhima Koregaon case. There is no actual incident of bombing, actual incident of finding arms, actual incident of any terror attack or anything of that kind. They are just charged on the basis, the 66% of the cases of people are arrested on the basis that there is a conspiracy to do something which may never have happened, which may never have been planned. So 66% of the cases are cases where there is no actual incident which has taken place. Now, this is something which is very, very, I think, very important. The second thing which is important also presently is the use of NIA. National Investigating Agency Act was brought in 2008, again by the earlier government. But its use in the present regime has been massive. And that is something which we have to understand. You see, normally prosecution is done by the state government. But if the central government wants some prosecution to, the investigation is done by the state government. But if the central government wants to take over an investigation, normally the investigating agency is CBI. But for CBI to take over investigation, you need the state government's consent. Without the permission of the state government, you can't hand over a case to CBI. NIA is different in the sense that NIA can take over any investigation, whether state government consents or not, as long as the central government wants it to take over, provided it's under some of the scheduled acts, one of the act being UAPA, another thing being sedition. So sedition, UAPA, etc., central government can direct that we are taking over the investigation, whether the state government agrees or not. And one knows that when the present central government directs such takeover, it is done for the purpose of directing the investigation in a particular way. That's the other thing which is very very important as far as why presently it is acquired even more draconian color than it was earlier. Next, you see, the earlier, who were the targets? The targets. Yes, earlier it was misused. Earlier targets were you protest, you are put in jail. Many of the people were then released from jail, even if you are charged with UAPA or TADA or POTA. But presently the targets are and essentially the targets were the movements, the ground level, the foot so-called. I mean, I wouldn't like to call them foot soldiers, but to put it loosely, they were the foot soldiers who were the targets earlier. Now they are directed. This is very, very selectively targeting, this particular regime is very selectively targeting human rights defenders and civil society activists in an attempt to crush voices of concern being raised either locally, nationally, or internationally. The targets include students like in the NRC-CAA protests, or cultural activists, journalists, lawyers, academicians, Dalit and tribal right activists, trade unionists, as in the Bhima Koregaon case. So this is the other thing which is very important. Of course, you see, the present regime is a right-wing Hindutva regime. It's a proto-fascist regime. And by its very nature, it is casteist, communal, and patriarchal. So while Muslims and Dalits were always targets of security legislations, even under the ordinary criminal law, the present regime takes it to the extreme. The hatred towards religious minorities is qualitatively different than in any other earlier regime. Whether it is abrogation of 370A, the passing of CAA, and the acute desire to implement NRC, not just in Assam, but across the country, the changes in history textbook or sternal implementation of beef ban laws and anti-conversion laws, both of which also operate against Dalits, various other legislative policy measures. I think UAPA is one of the weapons being used for advancing the project of Hindutva. And that's why it is again much more dangerous. Next two things which I just wanted to point out and then stop. Sixth thing why I think the present regime is much more dangerous is that, yes, people were being charged earlier also on the basis of some kind of no evidence, or on the basis of evidence which hardly met the requirement of evidence under law. But the present regime, okay, has taken recourse to planting evidence, as we saw in the Arsenal case. This is a qualitatively different approach than what was happening earlier, that you actually plant evidence in people's computers. Okay, it is not just a hacking of computer or tapping somebody's phone. That is trying to find out what that person is doing. But by planting evidence, you are actually, fabricating things, putting it on that person's computer, and that person will be arrested, and that person and his associates will be arrested and kept in jail for long times, as it is happening in Bhima Koregaon, and as it is likely to happen more and more in other cases if this is not stopped. And lastly, one of the things which I find very, very shocking with the present establishment is the use of the term frontal organizations. You see, there is no term like frontal organization in the entire UAPA. But in the schedule to the UAPA, where you actually list banned organization, you sometimes mention, okay, such and such organization and all its frontal organizations. What are those frontal organizations? Nobody knows. You know the name of the organization that is banned, but what is a frontal organization? Nobody knows. Okay, that you find out only when like I'll give you an example of Father Stan. Father Stan was a member of PUC. Okay, I am also a member of PUCL. Father Stan was member of PUCL. In the charge sheet and in the affidavit in reply, they say that Father Stan is member of a frontal organization, that is PUCL, okay, and therefore he is involved in terrorism. Okay, so basically every person who is member of PUCL becomes a terrorist. This you don't know because of some government notification, because you are notified in the schedule to the act, because in the reply or in the charge sheet suddenly this crops up. And this has not only happened with PUCL, this happened with various organizations, like Kabir Kala Manch is named as a frontal organization, Indian Association of People's Lawyers is named as a frontal organization, CPDR is named as a frontal organization. You name it and they just add them as frontal organization, and then you don't know whether you are a legal entity or not a legal entity, and you can be arrested tomorrow for being a terrorist. So now these things were not happening earlier. These things the present government has mastered. Okay, and therefore it becomes important when we are talking about UAPA. Okay, and the fact that yes, the Congress cannot wipe out its sins. Okay, I agree that they have brought in many of these laws, but the sins are compounded many more times by the present government because of its ideology, because of its targeting of Muslims and Dalits, because of the way in which they are mastering the prosecution process, the way they are taking over investigations and prosecutions. Yeah, it is in that and the way they are going against and the way the present government is completely going against dissent of any form whatsoever. Okay? In that context, I think it becomes very important for us to oppose not just the bail conditions, not just this, that, and the other. Strategically, one may modulate one's demands, but it's important that UAPA should go lock, stock, and barrel. It will go only the way Tada and Pota went. That is by protests on the streets. That is by civil society raising its voices. That is the only way this kind of a law will go. Of course, we have to use all methods possible, whether it's courts, whether it's talking to parliamentarians, etc., etc. But I personally feel that these kinds of draconian laws will never go unless you have a massive protest against these laws, owned up by the people themselves. And I think that is very important. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here.
And the Gauri Memorial Trust and all the members of the trust and CJP will together get it translated into Kannada, Marathi and Hindi as well. And we'll make the lecture available. Similarly, the transcript of Mr. Gautam Bhatia's lecture and Justice Nageshwar Rao's lecture and the panel discussion on the media, we are proposing to bring out in a booklet form. So I would like to thank all my colleagues at the Gauri Memorial Trust and CJP for making all these 4 events so successful and possible. The questions are here, Mihir, quite a few of them. I'll start with the one related to your end point, which is that we need a massive protest. The question is from 2 or 3 people, Miraj Ahmed, Bhaskar Rao, and Amrit Prasad, saying that what will it take to actually get social activist organizations together to develop a massive campaign and movement against UAPA-like laws, and what are the challenges?
See, it's already happening. A lot of organizations are coming together. They have already come together. One of the problems, of course, has been because of the COVID situation. It becomes difficult to at various places to go on the streets, etc. But I mean, I think it's important that we realize our opposition to UAPA is not just our opposition to UAPA, it's opposition to various policies of the government, the various directions which the government is taking, and within that place place our opposition to UAPA. Because we don't want a situation whereby, as Gautam was also saying last week, that you have UAPA repealed and replaced by another law which is even more terrible than UAPA. So it has to be not only for doing away with this law, but also a sustained campaign so that no such similar laws are brought in. That's so. I think it becomes very important to raise our voice against UAPA as often as we can. Have groups which work specifically, and that is happening. And I'm sure you will be able to find out from your city which are the groups which are working on this. And I think that's the only way, because yes, I mean, we have challenged it in courts and all that kind of thing. I'm not very hopeful that courts are going to dramatically strike down UAPA or something like that. You may have some dilution here and there of the bail conditions. Some of the courts have been also finding different ways of dealing with UAPA. So that is happening, but I don't have a blueprint. The only blueprint I have is that it's only people's protest which leads to such social changes. It's not the courts. It's not. I mean, courts and parliament will act depending on how much is the pressure put on them. What is the kind of pressure outside? What is the pressure from the citizenry? So I think it's very important they realize that, work towards that. Thanks.
Mihir, in connection with what you already made a comment about what the Supreme Court is likely or not likely to do, but just to emphasize what Revappa Amangond is asking, that with the recent remarks from some judges of the Supreme Court about intellectuals and the right to speak up, should we not expect more action from the Supreme Court?
Let me begin by saying that I hope that Supreme Court judges are as vocal when they are sitting on their chairs as they are when they are outside their chairs. That's the first thing, okay? Because it's one thing to give a lecture. It's another thing to convert it into a judgment. So I hope it happens. But remember one thing. Way back in 2011, if I can just take 2 minutes on this issue, which I had not covered earlier. Way back in 2011, the Supreme Court had passed some very good judgments in UAPA matters, where earlier people were arrested purely on the basis of membership of a so-called banned organization. Supreme Court said that mere membership is not enough. You have to be active. The prosecution has to prove that you are an active member. You have participated actively in some activity, not just that you are a member of an organization. And there were 3 good judgments which were passed by the Supreme Court way back in 2011. All this was wiped out by a judgment of the Supreme Court in what is known as Vatali. Yes, yeah. So in Zahur Ahmad Watali's case, Supreme Court essentially said that at the stage of bail, okay, the court effectively, this is what the court said, that at the stage of bail, you only look at what the prosecution has to offer. Whether that is admissible in evidence or not is not something which the court should go into. Just presume that what they are saying is correct and go on that basis and decide your bail application. Now, if you presume whatever the prosecution is producing is correct, then there is no way in which you can get bail. Okay, because then you remember, you have situation of sealed cover which is going on. You have situation under UAPA, especially where witnesses' names are not to be disclosed to you till the trial takes place. Okay, so you don't even know who is giving evidence, who is giving statements against you. How are you going to counter this? And the court says you have to presume that it is all correct. Okay, so Zahur Ahmad Watali is a very, very bad judgment of the Supreme Court, and that has to go. That's because otherwise getting bail becomes very difficult. The Delhi High Court tried in its own way to get around Zahur Ahmad Watali by interpreting Watali in a very creative way. Similarly, the Bombay High Court in one or two cases has done that. But these matters are up for grabs in Supreme Court. We don't know what the Supreme Court is ultimately going to do about it. But what the Supreme Court has been doing, okay, and some of the high courts have been doing, is they've been saying that if a person has spent long enough time in jail, then that person, in Najib's case, for instance, they said that that person can be released on bail. Okay. Now, Najib had spent 5 years in jail, but do you really want people to spend 5 years in jail before you say that now you release them on bail? Okay, so that's one thing which is happening. That if you have already spent considerable time in jail, then the court says, okay, then the harsh conditions of bail won't apply. Okay, but what is considerable time will vary from case to case. Similarly, now we have been getting some amount of medical bails from the courts, where like Varavara Rao's case, where he was medically unfit and he was granted bail. So that is something which third thing is attempts are being made, because now Supreme Court has said that house arrest can also be granted in a fit case. So attempts are being made to say that some people should be given house arrest depending on their age and health, etc., etc. We don't know what will happen ultimately, but I do feel that till Zahur Ahmad Watali is there, it's going to be very difficult, okay, to ease this process of getting bail. Some people may get bail, some people may not get bail. It's very difficult to predict. Yeah.
There's a comment from Facebook from Mr. Amrit Prasad that what can I do if I have FIRs filed against me for activism and there is no lawyer to defend me? What can economically oppressed classes do in such a case if they cannot afford a lawyer?
Well, you are right. This is a problem faced by a lot of people outside the jail and inside the jail. Technically, on paper, we have the legal aid system, which is supposed to be functional, where every person is entitled to a lawyer to be paid by the state. That system is not very working in a very happy manner. I wouldn't. I mean, there are cases. There are some good lawyers on those panels, but there are a large number of lawyers are very ineffective and do not pay any attention, etc. You have in most of the cities now, big cities at least, okay, persons who are willing to do pro bono work, lawyers with experience, lawyers who otherwise have a good practice, willing to do pro bono work. So and organizations who are willing to help. So I think that is one thing which can be done, but I don't think even that will solve all the problems of everybody. But that is something which can be tried out in various places where you are.
There's another question about the backlog of cases. The backlog of cases in the Supreme Court of India and other courts doesn't ensure certainty of punishment for wrongdoers, and therefore justice delayed is justice denied. How can we overcome this vicious cycle?
Well, since 1950, there have been commissions after commissions making recommendations after recommendations as to how the backlog should be removed, because backlog has been there right from beginning and it keeps on increasing. One of the problems is, of course, there are not enough number of judges. Enough number of sanctioned posts of judges. Even those posts which are sanctioned are not filled up, etc., etc. And there are various. I mean, backlog is a huge problem which requires a separate discussion altogether. And I am not sure whether I'll be able to cover that here. So I would just leave it at that, saying that it's a huge problem. You are right in recognizing the problem. It's a huge problem, and that is one of the reasons why bail becomes very important. Because of the backlog, the trials take 8 to 10 years, 12 years, etc., etc. If there was no backlog, then one could have dealt with this bail problem. If suppose I know that I am arrested 6 months down the line, the trial will be over, then it's then you are looking at it in a completely different manner. But because there is a backlog and because trials take so long, bail becomes a very central thing in these things. Yeah.
So this is from Pushpa from Swaraj Abhiyan. Says, we the people of India must and are already trying to demand a repeal of the old law of sedition in a couple of states. At the same time, can UAPA, NSA, etc. be protested against on grounds that they militate against the fundamental rights guaranteed in our constitution?
Well, yes, I think the challenges, constitutional challenges which are made to these laws are also on the grounds that they violate the constitutional guarantees, including right, freedom of speech and expression, right to protest, right to form associations, etc. Of course, all these fundamental rights have their exceptions carved out within the fundamental right itself. And therefore, the Supreme Court says that these come within the exceptions and therefore they are allowed kind of thing, So that happens. Yes, of course, they have to be protested on the basis that they violate constitutional guarantees. Okay, because right to life, right to freedom of speech and expression, Article 14, equality, non-discrimination, non-arbitrariness, etc., etc. Yes. So I do believe that they should be protested by using constitutional mechanism, by saying that they violate constitution. I think that's the only way. Like sedition. Now remember one thing: sedition law was so misused in recent times that despite Supreme Court 6 months back saying that we are not going to go into challenge to sedition, after that, after 3 months, have again said that no, we'll look into the constitutional validity of sedition. Because of the protest, because it comes in papers, because it's every day they are hearing some case of sedition, somebody arrested on sedition, etc., etc. So I think these kind of things do matter in courts. So yes, I think we'll have to, and even outside courts where we raise. But remember one thing. I mean, this is something which I want to say, that when we talk about parliamentary parties opposing UAPA, one of the things which we must tell the parliamentary parties is that look, in your own state where you are ruling, stop using UAPA.
Yeah.
Kerala has 100 people under UAPA. Okay, today. Okay, under the present government. So my demand to them would be at least make a state commitment that in your own state you won't use UAP against people, you won't use sedition against people. At least make that kind of commitment. You can do that. Okay? Or you set up review committees. Nobody is set up to stop you from setting up review committees. The court, the law doesn't bar you from setting up. But do that. So I say, so it's one thing saying that we oppose everything. We should do away with UAP, but start with these things. That's what I feel.
Mr. Bhaskar Rao is very agitated. He said in almost all detention under UAPA, says police accuse that the person is Maoist or a terrorist. Recently, a case against a member of our Organization for Protection of Democratic Rights in Warangal has been filed, making totally false accusation that he has links with Maoists. Courts are very unhelpful and even the legal community is non-cooperative.
Well, I completely agree with you, and I can't. This happens across the country. The courts are. You see, remember one thing. One thing I forgot to mention when I was speaking, that earlier in Pota and Tada, you had a provision which said, as I mentioned even when I was speaking, you had a provision which says that a police officer can be prosecuted if he wrongfully, maliciously prosecutes somebody under Pota or Tada. Similarly, the person who is so prosecuted can get compensation. Now that provision has been done away with in UAPA. Okay, that is dropped. Okay, so UAPA doesn't have that provision. So you can't prosecute police officers even if you are wrongfully charged. You can't seek compensation even if you are wrongfully charged. Now, this is the situation. Of course, other methods will have to be found to prosecute and all that. But the law which provided for that protection, that is also been dropped.
I think that answers Ms. Leena Abraham's question also related to abuse of the law. Abhijit has a question about if being abused in our nation in the name of law and order, can we not approach an international law or body and bring pressure on the government? And what are the dynamics involved in that process?
Well, there are two things. It's not possible for an international body to to strike down an Indian law. That is not possible, but it's definitely important to bring pressure. Okay, use various bodies, international bodies, which are being used, whether in Bhima Koregaon case or various other cases, they are being used in terms of approaching those bodies and telling them to, whether it's human rights defenders, special rapporteur of United Nations, or various other special rapporteurs and bodies under United Nations, which people do approach these bodies, and they have been taking certain positive stands. The government, of course, and Tisra, you know it very well. You were in court when you were told not to write anything to international bodies. The courts and the government think that international bodies should not interfere in our affairs, except when it comes to economics, except when it comes to buying Rafale or whatever is other things. But other things you should not, in these kind of things, you should not interfere. So courts also don't look at it in a very favorable way. And of course, the government says that you are trying to malign the name of India abroad. You know, that's a standard thing which they throw at you. But I don't think that should stop us from approaching because whatever international pressure is built up always acts in some way or the other. Okay, it always has some kind of an impact. It has, and I think we should not give up that platform. You know,
we'll now stop the question and answer session with just one comment from senior journalist Pamela Philippos, who I think was responding to Mihir's comment on a more vibrant stage of the NHRC in the 1990s, when she said that NHRC is missing in action and it should be called out. At present, it is headed by a government favorite. So, I mean, I'll just end over there, because saying that this is what it means, I guess, when we talk about the hollowing out of our institutions. I just hope that Professor Mr. Ganesh Devi is here, because I was asked to take over so many duties today, because Sridhar is in Mysore, unstable connection. Ganesh Devi is between Pune and Belgaum and Dharwad. So I was hoping he'll be there to make the very important and valuable concluding remarks on behalf of the Gauri Memorial Trust. Before I just hand over and conclude for today, and thank you, Mihir, very, very much for this extremely important lecture. I just want to mention that today there's been a fantastic Mahaparao of the farmers at Muzaffarnagar. Every report that one has got is that it was a huge gathering. And given the fact that last Saturday we saw on 28th of August, we saw that brutal lathi charge by the Karnal ADM Ayush Sinha that broke the heads of our farmers. In response, our farmers have demonstrated peacefully. There has been a massive protest. And I think I would just like to end by something that Asif, Devangana, Natasha certainly said, but with Mihir emphasized, that it's also about the repealing of the 40 labor laws, bringing in anti-labor legislation, the attacks on the Adivasis and the Forest Rights Act. All of these things need to be seen in tandem with along with the draconian use of laws like the UAPA, because that is where this extremely proto-fascist regime is headed towards. And unless we see what's coming, we won't be able to strategize and organize ourselves against it. Can somebody help me and tell me if Ganesh Devi sir is here? And then I can.
He was there, but I'm due to connection. I guess he's not here.
Sridhar, may I quickly call you to make the concluding remarks then, please? Since I know you're there, I think. On behalf of the trust, I think we really miss Ganesh Devi, sir, but, or would somebody else do it? Please tell me. He's back, Deepu?
He's back, yeah.
Okay, Ganesh Devi, sir, I'm so sorry. I know you've been trying to do this from the road, and thank you very, very much for that. And I'm sorry it's run a bit over time, but it's been a very fascinating discussion. So Ganesh Devi.
Good evening, everybody. Today, the 5th September this year, is a very special day. The three young friends who spoke are like the stars in a dark night. And on behalf of everybody listening to them, I salute them. Absolutely fascinating for the fearlessness and the dignity, that's the word, sister, you use, and clarity of thought that they spoke. That's very reassuring for this nation and for the humanity. And I'm sure that listening to them, many hundreds and thousands will feel inspired and the light will spread. this year is very special because it reminds us that a century ago, Dr. Ambedkar had launched his Mukanayak. And here, this time, we have such eloquent Nayaks to lead our path. This year is also very special for me, and particularly this week of September, because it's exactly 100 years ago that Mahatma Gandhi had transformed himself completely, sartorially, when he came back as a barrister and then became a Kathiawadi dressed Gujarati. But in September 1921, he had become one with the people. I think it is the barrister becoming one with the people is exactly the message that Mihir Desai was giving us, that it is not just the lawyers in the Supreme Court or the High Courts or the lawmakers or lawbreakers in the parliament, but is the people of India. If they come together, a change may come. But friends, we're all aware that the atmosphere of terror, fear, intimidation is far, far too much. The media is intimidated. Those who are supposed to speak, those social classes are put in mighty fear. And people already suffering from unemployment and COVID and lack of education, they have no time to pay attention to what is happening outside. And therefore, it is a forum like the Gauri Trust and other organizations, Citizens for Peace or Justice, they matter a lot. And I think what we did over the last 4 weeks, listening to voices of protest, of reason, of courage, of compassion, and voices that will give a new direction to this country. Bringing them together was a wonderful thing. I met Gauri the last time 3 days before she was assassinated. I met her in the Chief Minister's office in Bangalore. She had gone there just as I had gone there, asking for expediting the investigation of Dr. Kalburgi's case. I got interested in Kalburgi's case because, that murder provoked a nationwide protest of award wapasi. It is Dr. Dabolkar, Comrade Pansare, Dr. Kalburgi, and hundreds of journalists who have been killed. And you may remember that the wife of a journalist who worked for Hindustan Times is still waiting for a simple FIR to be filed. We are in strange times. We are in terrible times. But when these young people who spoke to us this evening speak, and they have been speaking courageously, fearlessly, when they speak, I, as an old man, feel that this country has a lot of hope. I feel that the martyrdom of Dr. Dabolkar or Comrade Pansare or Dr. Kalburgi or Gauri Lankesh will not be wasted. They will keep inspiring us. And the young generation that is showing so much courage all over the country will inspire this country. As an old man, I wish this country a longer spell of democracy and fulfillment, at least in part, of the lofty dream that the directive principles of the Constitution give us. May our wishes be fulfilled. May the martyrs keep inspiring us. And may there be more and many more youngsters who have this courage and exemplary dignity. I thank Gauri Memorial Trust and all the trustees and Mr. Settleward in particular for bringing about these 4 weeks of great, spell of thinking deeply, profoundly, carefully, and in an oriented way. Thank you, everybody. And thank you and good night. And we meet again on this munch, on this platform next year too, with more voices, more courage, and maybe in a much better situation. Let's hope so. And let's all come together for bringing about that change. We need change for this country, for the poor of this country, for those who are oppressed. And let's give everything that we have for bringing about that change in a united way. Jai Hind, thank you, and salute to all the martyrs, and salutes again to all the young people who give me hope. Thank you.